And I'm going to end up talking more than a.
That's fine.
Like I told you.
Welcome to the Skeptic Tank. I am your host, Chevy Chase, and you're not, or something. Anyway,
Close.
I got fellow skeptic in the tank here tonight. Martin's with me, and we are going to talk about hyperbole that has deadly consequences, if you will. How's that for provocative? You remember I said that the title that I chose for tonight's show was designed to be provocative on purpose. I'm not necessarily saying that. So actually, let me give you a little bit of background. Our American Civil War, as you may have discovered, Martin, in your researching this topic,
1860.
Yes, but that was actually unusual in terms of two armed factions.
Yes.
With a split government is very unusual. That's not generally what we find.
This time
Civil
will be
War
different.
to be.
Yeah, this time will be different if it happens.
Well, what I was referring to directly was like the Spanish Civil War, for example. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that Spain was going to split into a group that seceded. It was actually an uprising in which, instead of government trying to put it down, some of the government factioned off along with the uprising.
Oh, yeah, we have Colombia, Syria, and Belfast are all examples of different kinds
of civil war. You did your research, ladies and gentlemen. So what I'm concerned about here, and this is what we were just talking about, is that we have, and like I said, you can find it anywhere on Facebook, and I engage people every day with these ideas. Go to a page where somebody's going, Trump and his enablers, the insurrectionist GOP, using hyperbolic language like that. And you say, well, hang on a second. If we could define some terms, maybe we could come to some common ground. Would you agree that that there are reasonable and intelligent people in this world that find that there is cause to be concerned about the veracity of our election? No, that's all bullshit. If you believe that stuff, you're a conspiracy theorist. You're a loony. So actually, somebody I just saw today, said that now we know where all 70 million of the Nazis in this country are because they're all Trump voters. To me, this is absolutely terrifying. And unfortunately, I would like to be able to say that this is a minority of people. And unfortunately, what I see is that this is the kind of rift that I see everywhere, not just in small places.
Well, I want to talk about how we got here and how I think we got here.
Fair enough.
Less about those details and kind of dig into it. I think I've taken some time to kind of look at possible, and one of the things I want to bring up is this just the effects of natural decay of a civilization that's going under?
I was glad that you had made that a talking point because we have there's a lot to that.
Yeah, and so it's in some ways it's just sort of inevitable, and we could just sit here and like we're watching a baseball game and just call the game as it takes place. Yep. We're not going to stop it from happening. Nope. The game's going to get played. It's been played before. So I think the interesting thing is how did we get here and what can we expect? What's it going to look like when it happens?
It's happening.
It already has started. Yeah, it has already started in a lot of ways, which is kind of my last part. So if you'll indulge me here, I'll set up one thing.
Please set the table
as an opening comment, and then that'll lead into a second one. But I want to get your input after I've said that.
Please go ahead.
So I read a book called Infinite. It's called The Infinite Game. And it was written from a gentleman named Simon Sinek, and he is a businessman. So he was written from a perspective of social business and how they operate. But it really translates really well. And he says that there are two different kinds of games which play. One is an infinite game. Infinite games have no timelines. There's no finish line. There's no practical end of the game. The goal is not to defeat your competition, but to keep the game going as long as possible. So that's the idea of an infinite game. Finite games are played with known players, fixed rules, agreed upon objectives, and when that objective is reached, the game is over. Now, problems arise, he says, that when you try to lead your team into an infinite game using finite strategies, you end up with problems. So, for example, the Vietnam War. For the Viet Cong, the Vietnamese, that war has been going on long before we got there. We were just another people getting in the middle of it. And we were trying to fight an old school war where somebody's going to finally raise the flag and give up, once they've lost. and that was not the kind of war that it was. And we continue to use those strategies at our peril because they were fighting a different kind of war altogether. So that's kind of a big example. So what we learned from the finite mindset is all kind of problems that. So when we use this, we lose trust, we lose cooperation, we lose innovation. So what I think is that our politicians right now are playing a finite game when it should be an infinite game. We should be trying to keep things going on as long as we can.
I like it.
The competition between the two sides is healthy. So, for instance,
yes.
Apple, in 1981, IBM rolled out the first personal computer of theirs, and they were going to come in there and try to destroy the market. And Apple took out a big ad in Wall Street Journal that said, "Welcome to the most exciting, important marketplace of the computer science revolution in 35 years. We're glad that you're here. We look forward to having responsible competition and a massive effort to distribute American technology to the world." So they welcomed the competition because they had a cause. And that's the important thing about having an infinite war is you have to have a just cause. So our cause is that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, we were endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is a great cause. It's one that's it's infinite. It goes on and on. It's unachievable, which is another reason why it's worth fighting for. We have lost that cause.
Yes, we have.
Because, and the two sides are right. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, please. Actually, I was going to stop myself and wait until you've made all your points.
Well, the basic point, I'll let you go. I want to kind of rephrase it because I talk so fast and I go through it so quick and I'm so nervous. But basically, the two sides should be fighting an infinite war, meaning that they should be battling for ideas and it should be healthy competition, and they shouldn't be trying to destroy each other. They should be trying to make each other better in the process, and we're not doing that right now.
Okay, and so I think I love this concept of the infinite war. What's interesting about that is you said that the gentleman who wrote the book was a businessman, and it's funny that you point out that one of his primary points is that business is like an infinite war. As it should be. This is actually one of the complaints. This is one of the descriptions that Marx used for capitalism, in that it's got to constantly be making more money. There really isn't an end to the game, and he saw that as a hindrance, which I think is very interesting.
Because he didn't see a greater purpose.
I guess you could say that that's what it was. I think that what he was trying to say was that you have a business that builds itself up, and then it has to continue making a profit. Otherwise, the business is not doing what it's supposed to do. Its primary function is not being met. And so then you have companies who will do pretty much anything. They will cut costs. They will produce inferior products. They'll ship their products overseas. They will essentially destroy themselves, their own market, and their customers in the pursuit of that infinite war.
Those are finite strategies. When you start to go into, cutting costs and all those things, those are not serving the greater purpose of your business. That's when it's just. Go ahead.
So let's use that as a way to draw a parallel to what you were saying. Is that life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness are incredible Bill of Rights, the foundational ideals of this country that. Many countries around the world were in awe. They copied these ideas. Many did, because you're right. I think that you said something that is so right on, and that is that this is a never-ending, it really is. This is why they called it an experiment. The idea really was to continue pursuing those things. Not that we'd ever necessarily reach them, but that because it was also very clear that those things, the definitions of those things would change over time.
Well, real quick, I'll interject and I'll let you finish your thought. That is exactly the nature of, if you have a purpose, having a purpose that is not attainable is the best purpose you can have.
Actually, if that is the case, then you would not necessarily start cutting costs and destroying your own market and everything else as a way to stay alive. You would actually go, we have to reinvent it instead. There's go. And I think that's a very, very, very interesting idea. One of the things that has caused the loss of social cohesion in this country, which is, in my own view, one of the foundational problems with why we're losing, we're actually losing a battle that is not supposed to be finite. Yeah, you know what I mean? And we're losing it because people say, well, wait a minute, what about mine? You guys all got yours. All these people that look like you, that grew up like you, got yours. There's a whole group of people that were left behind from that. And so, therefore, that negates, that invalidates the idea in the first place. That's what we're hearing. Because all men were not created equal, that's clear. Because look at all these people who didn't get theirs, and again, I happen to agree. America did not so far deliver her promise to all of her citizens as she was supposed to have.
Yeah, right.
At the same time, does that mean, is that actually a call to end it, to destroy it, to burn it to the ground, and then try something different?
Well, it's decaying from inside because that core mythology that holds us together, that myth that America is to
social cohesion.
That myth is that if you go to the right schools, or if you work hard, if you play by the rules, then there's a place for you in this society. That is the core mythology of who we are as a society. And there are people that never have had that. And they're not really surprised as much about what's going on. And then you have people that are just experiencing that for the first time over the last maybe 20, 25 years. They've lost touch. They no longer feel that the game is fair. They no longer feel that they have that American dream is possible for them. And that ends up with a profound amount of despair. When you lose faith in that mythology, you lose faith in society, you lose your connections to society, and it's a profound loss of connection. And you begin to find these people having feelings of self-annihilation. And then emotionally, they turn that into annihilating others. And you start ending up with poison groups that connect. You see it in poor, let's just say in some neighborhoods where gang life is very, very popular. I mean, these people don't have that social connection. They don't see, if I work hard and do the right thing, they don't see it as fair. They don't see that there's any way out. So they form these gangs, and that becomes the social connection for them. And now we're seeing, and it's always been, and you see it when like the Watts riots, when people often they go, well, why do these people burn down their own stuff when they get upset? I mean, they're suicidal in a sense because they don't see any way out. They don't see it as fair. And now we're seeing this on the right. Now we're seeing, and Trump's tied into this feeling that group of people are having for the first side. Now we have two sides.
That is really interesting too, because this is something that our friend David Peters pointed out to me today. He's going, wait a minute, this is weird. The right's very serious. It looks like they're actually going to start fighting and burning shit and and taking to the streets. And he said, did you expect this? And I said, yeah, why? He thought it was strange. I was saying, well, why would you? Because what you have to appreciate is that this is also a group of people who feels like they've been screwed by the system. Just because they don't necessarily look like other people who have been oppressed in the past doesn't mean that they cannot perceive an oppression. You know what I mean? And so maybe the reasons are different. It's not that they have been shut out of something.
Well, the core reason is the same. They've lost the mythology. They no longer feel connected to what America has to offer. They feel like it's been lost.
So so here's the question that I have my own opinions, but I want to see what you think. Do you believe that this is a matter of we can agree that historically great empires and great powers decay. So I happen to know what the common thread is between them, but what I would like to hear from you is whether or not you think that this particular situation has been engineered by power, or is it simply just a natural decay?
Okay, well, I haven't thought about that much. I think that this doesn't serve power.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think this serves power. I don't think it does.
Well, okay, keep going. Go ahead and flesh it out because I have some thoughts for you.
Well, no, I'm kind of interested in your thoughts because that's kind of where I kind of know that I haven't done my homework particularly on. I have a couple books. I'm beginning to study how civilizations collapse, and I'm curious about that. But I feel like this is the natural sense of decay. I don't think this is engineered or organized.
Well, okay, so two things. It was kind of a loaded question in that
it's bad management is what it is.
That engineering it could also be philosophically called natural. Because what ends up happening is that let me take one of my favorite examples, and this one is often misinterpreted, almost 100% of the time, and that is that we have been presented with different things to be afraid of in order to provide power with more power. Historically, that's how it works. Boogeymen are created. I hate being so flatly hyperbolic, but I think it's the best way to illustrate my point. So, for example, we had the Red Scare, in the 50s, in the 60s, during the Cold War. We had Russia was our big enemy. Was there a possibility that we were going to blow each other up and wipe ourselves off the face of the earth? Yes. But in terms of what did we, the people whose power is vested in, the government, the power of the government is vested actually in us in terms of our own founding documents, that mythology that you're talking about. How much power did we confer of ours to the top based on that kind of rhetoric and propaganda? The Red Scare, for example, quite a bit. McCarthy was actually allowed to hold those hearings. He was allowed to stop Hollywood scriptwriters from writing scripts because they had communist affiliations. He actually scared the living hell out of other members of the Congress because he had basically untethered power. He was able to say, look, if you screw around with it, you know who Eisenhower was afraid of? McCarthy. And Eisenhower was no communist. So could McCarthy's power actually end up being, could he twist something that Eisenhower did? So anyway, that's I'm not going to, I tend to
no, I was trying to
derail myself.
I didn't want to interrupt you if you were, so you're making the point that McCarthyism and what they were doing was to serve power.
Most definitely.
But is McCarthy, was he just an outlier? Was he just a crazy fuck that got in there and took advantage of a situation, and then all of a sudden nobody really even knew before it was too late what was going on?
No, not at all. In fact, it was a great deal.
So who was he partnered with? He was FBI, right?
A great deal of propaganda had been created around communists infiltrating the country about how they were taking over the banks, that they had a grand plan.
Where was it coming from? Was it coming from him?
From McCarthy? No, he was not. Again, this is like Trump. He's not the disease. He's the symptom. The government needed to get. This was. Do you recall the speech from Eisenhower as he was leaving office? He talked about what we need to be the most concerned with.
Yes,
military-industrial complex and their methods and the ways that they go about transferring our money and our power to them. And he was saying that this is, what we have to look forward to if we're not careful about this is continuing reasons to involve ourselves in engagements and wars in order to continue creating money for the corporate war machine as well as the power at the top. Okay. So, and he was warning us about the entire military-industrial complex from the CIA, the FBI, the Congress, all of the different funding mechanisms, et cetera. So no, McCarthy was able to take all of that stuff.
He did. Co-opted, yeah.
That was a power grab.
They were like, wait, we didn't mean for this to happen at all. That's what we were going for. Well, but what we're talking about here is something that's happening. Like I can see those, afraid of, right now it's like, Venezuela is, that's, we're scared of Venezuela, or Russia, or all these things we're doing at the same time. And that's for individual groups trying to get their side rallied up. But as far as, is this power Central America, is this civil war that's being produced, is that good for power in America? I don't see how that would benefit them.
Well, yes, of course, because right now power is constrained by the limits that are placed on power by the Constitution. For example, there was a recording of some meeting that Joe Biden had last month. I believe it was on the 11th of December. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but he was addressing a group of leaders that represented different minorities and different groups, etc. And he was saying, look, I can't write an executive order to get rid of AR-15s. I can't do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm constrained by the Constitution. Ultimately, this upset a lot of people, and they heard it because why can't he? We have reached a point, you're talking about decay. Our founding documents are supposed to constrain power. They're not supposed to constrain the people's power. They're supposed to constrain the power of government. That's the design. So over time, what they're asking for, and another great example, what was the most recent big scare you can think of in the last 20 years?
It should come to me easily, but I don't know which one.
Terrorism.
Terrorism, yeah,
Islamic terrorism. So we had
the answer was too easy. That's why.
The 9/11, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I get that. 9/11 attacks produced a couple of foreign wars that we're still involved in 20 years later, and we can get into why that is later. But what came of that was the Patriot Act, the single greatest transfer of power from the people to the government in history. And believe me, the CIA, the FBI, people whose jobs could actually end up facing cuts if this kind of stuff doesn't, hey, wow, look, we're solving these problems. Crime is lower. We don't have nearly as much to worry about, which means we really don't need to keep funding your department this much. I'm not saying that that's the reason it was done. I'm saying that is one of that's the microcosm. That's the
ripple in the water whenever something like that happens that's where it ends up. And because it's always the same, it's freedom for safety. That's always the equation.
So let's talk about something contemporary. Today, I don't know if you saw it or not, but Chuck Schumer went on live television and accused Ted Cruz of being a domestic terrorist and said he should be put on the no-fly list because Ted supported the idea of an inquiry into the election and the cohesion of the election.
Yeah, Ted did not come on the House, right? He kept doing it, right?
What he did was say what Ted, if you go back and read it, and what he was saying and everything he said about it was, okay, we really need to let our people that hired us, our constituency, know that we hear their concerns. And I think the best way to deal with this at this late stage in the game is to give us enough time to simply gather the information that we already have, not necessarily even open new inquiries, and make a presentation to our constituents that says we have faith that these things are accurate. That's essentially, I'm kind of summarizing. But when power is trying to unseat power, what do? They take every weapon out of the tool bag and they beat the shit out of each other with it. So right now we have what happened last week has upset people from both sides of the aisle and from people all over the world, right? So that is now being seen as a great weakness. The Republicans blew it. Their leader blew it. His political credit is shot. So now we're
all pissed off.
So now they have like his cabinet started going, I'm out of here because I'm not going to be associated with this.
David courage there.
David Peters last night rightfully pointed out that from here forward, there won't be an article or a history book about Trump that doesn't start with a photograph of people storming, if you will, the Capitol building. And and he's right. He will be associated with that first.
It's just like Nixon and Watergate.
That's exactly right.
So Nixon did all sorts of great things, but
so actually he did quite a few solid things. He did.
Yeah.
So that being said, we have what other Democrats want to do? Well, they actually won both runoff elections in Georgia, so now they actually have some power in the House of Representatives or the Senate.
A little bit.
A little tiny bit, but all they need is Kamala Harris as the vice president to break any ties. So now he goes on TV and starts talking about actually putting Ted Cruz, who is not in. He's actually a pretty decent guy. He understands the Constitution probably better than 2/3
for a politician.
Yeah, for a politician, he's not a bad guy. You can disagree with his policies, but is he actually a vile human being? No.
No. He's I actually. So what? I mean.
So right now they're trying. The Democrats are capitalizing on this tragic event,
which of course they would.
Well, of course, the Republicans would have done the same thing. And
Absolutely.
This is a few months ago when everybody was up in arms about stacking the court. You're going to appoint this person, even though this is, you're on your way out, blah, 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 blah. And I'm going, I read Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. Doesn't say anything about, I am leaving office this year. There's an election coming up, so I should just wait.
I don't think, are we still mad at John Adams for making changes to the court, or is that...
Well, this is the funny thing about what we're talking about here is that you will have, now we have we've always been fairly divided, but here's actually an instance from history that not a lot of people are aware of. During Woodrow Wilson's term, he tried to do a lot of things extra constitutionally that had to do with spending. He was trying to create special departments that could, by de facto, get a budget without congressional approval. He did a number of things like this. And one day, both houses of Congress, both sides of the aisle, marched right down Pennsylvania Avenue, right up to the front door of the White House, in solidarity to let him know that that was not his job, it was their job, and to stop screwing around with it. Can you imagine? It gives me goosebumps to think about it. To have both houses of Congress, both parties going, you know what, we don't agree with each other on everything, but this is the way this country is supposed to work.
That's
Here's our balance of power.
They probably both still, in some ways, they had a cause. That was before we lost our way.
Did we, or have we even found our way yet? I think that's the question I have for you.
Well, I've been reading a lot of books that basically have given me a very pessimistic view of civilization.
Very bleak.
Yeah, I think this is all a waste of time because none of this is going to work. It's not going to work. It's like if you have these ingredients that would make a great breakfast, which is humanity, and you tell a chef, here, take these ingredients and make a dessert. And that's what this society is. It's a dessert and it's not breakfast. So we got the wrong ingredients. The human morality was built to live in a hunter-gatherer type of a situation. It has not yet evolved to figure out how to live like this. We've tried religions, we've tried governments, we've tried philosophy, we've tried drugs, we've tried everything to make it work, and it still hasn't worked. And we keep just insanity going over and over again. So this is just a fun time watching the baseball game, it's my opinion. It's like, how are we going to fuck it up this time?
Well, here's the thing about you had used the baseball analogy earlier. You can't have you used to be able to end the game in a tie, and now you can't. So so it does back in the 20s, there was a tie, and then they would actually have a playoff to break the tie. So that rule changed a long time ago. So right now we're not even in a tie. What it is just this side is. Here's a great example. Yesterday we had Cliff. Was it Cliff Clark? Clint, new guy that David recommended come and hang out at the tank. Full of hyperbole. Really just. I was astonished at the type 1 aggressive hyperbolic stuff that he was, and so I kept looking at it going, this is really weird because we generally don't get that. The people that come to the tank want to discuss stuff. He didn't. He wanted to bludgeon people. So we get those every once in a while. Anyway,
if he hangs around long enough, he'll figure it out.
He had made a statement that I had later determined that he probably removed directly from his rectum, that the country is moving to the far right, and it has been for a long time. And a couple of years ago, Pew Research actually did a pretty well put together definitive on the fact that the country has been moving left, and the right has been moving towards the center at the same time. So, and I said, look, I can back this up here. Give me a second, and I'll pull from my research. You've seen my OneNote. It's really actually packed with this kind of stuff. And I shared with him a couple of links, one of which was to, I think the original site was the Business Insider, who had reposted it as like an AP kind of thing. And then I posted the actual study itself. His first response was, well, once I got past, your first source, which was clearly right-leaning, and I keep thinking, okay, so if I gave you a left-leaning one, that would have made it more accurate? This is the kind of stupid divide that I'm talking about.
Well, and this is what I came from. So those were all the same techniques that I was used. I was raised in that liberal army, and they gave me a tool set to work with. And that was the first tool set that I'd used, was to discount any information that you gave me that was counter to what I believed in as, attack the source.
Right, which is one of the most incredibly, first of all, it is a form of ad hominem. Ad hominem has ad hominem fallacies. There are several of them, and one of them is to actually attack the source rather than debate the information that the source is presenting. And I'll be honest with you, it was a hard habit for me to break. Because I would get, somebody would share with me a article from Jacobin, for example, which is a far left, communist magazine, and over time, I came to truly appreciate how well they make their presentations. I don't have to necessarily agree with what they're presenting. So that's what I'm talking about, is simple things like that. When I say in a thread on Facebook, we have people just Trump this and he's evil, and there's all these Nazis, like I said, on this very thread that I'm talking about that just happened today. This woman was saying 70 million Nazis voted for Trump. And then you get this is what we call a syllogistic fallacy. Not all Republicans are Nazis, but all Nazis are Republicans. What an incredibly stupid statement. It is just, it's so poorly formed. The conclusion
Not all Democrats are socialists, but all
socialists are Democrats. Again, okay, so let's go take a survey of all of them and find out if that's true. I guarantee you we're going to find out that it isn't. Yeah. It's just a dumb thing to say. And so when I challenged that, and I said, look, this is actually, we could call it a non sequitur. We could call it a syllogistic fallacy. We could call it a begging the question. We could call it red herring. It's a mess. It's so dumb. And his pushback was, the fact is that there's one side in this country that's good and right, and the other side is evil and vile and racist, and they should be put down. Mm-hmm. And this, like I said, I wish this was not the exception. I wish I could say that.
So where did this all come from, right? So like I kind of mentioned that you have everybody is in this decay. They've lost, they're prone to fall for these things now. They're prone to them, and we also have a media and a social media. Social media is the new thing that's never existed. So that's a new way for all these people to fall into it. So how have we gotten to this point where the first step to actually having a full war is we got to dehumanize the other side? Because humans won't.
We're well on the way.
So we're well on the way on that. And this might serve back to your power thing, because the powers that exist that have been doing this for quite some time. And I think we can probably argue that they're political, right? The Republicans and the Democrats have done this, along with the media, who is a little bit of both, right?
Complicit.
So you're saying, does that serve power? I don't know if they now maybe, so I'll use this real quick. All of a sudden, Trump's been being Trump for 4 years, 5 years. He's been doing the same type of speeches. Mm-hmm. He went and did a speech at the Capitol. About the only really difference was that he said, and now we're all going down to the Capitol. But he didn't tell them,
No, actually, what he said was, "Let's go over there and show them our support and show them." He actually,
strong and all
for once,
stuff,
he said something decent.
But hold on. But the point is that the outcome was different, not the speech. And now suddenly everybody's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening." Now that we have created these dehumanized sides, are the powers that be going to be all? Well, I didn't know this. This wasn't the outcome that we wanted. They've been doing this all along, they're going to act surprised that this is where we're at right now.
This is actually a really good point. Are you familiar with Dr. James Lindsay?
No.
Dr. Lindsay he's actually a mathematician and a professor who has. Are you familiar with the great academic hoax? A couple of years ago, perpetrated by two university professors and a graduate student. Well, she's actually a master's student, where they actually wrote academic papers based on complete bullshit.
Yes,
one of which, and for those of you who aren't familiar with this, you should look it up. It's brilliant stuff. It was hypothesized by Dr. Lindsay and. At the moment, his partner escapes me. That things like a critical race theory that was now being used as has found its way into mainstream culture, and as a result has created things like white fragility seminars, and has found its way into government and is being now used as a foundational weapon for political and social and cultural power, when it doesn't have a solid epistemology. And that the people that purvey this kind of stuff, the people that are selling this kind of stuff, write these papers that no longer require any academic rigor in a way to credential themselves. Okay, so what they did was write some papers and then submit them for publication, and this is kind of how you do it. You get as an academic, you get your creds. Your street cred comes from being published in peer-reviewed journals. So one of the things, and there's two of them that are my favorite, but I'm going to start with one that's kind of familiar, and that is Hitler wrote a book while he was in prison before he took power in Germany called Mein Kampf, which translates to My Struggle. And Mein Kampf is it's his manifesto. And it's got all of his insane ideas in it about Jews and etc. They took Mein Kampf and changed the words about Jews and replaced them with men. So it was a feminist tome now. And so men do this and men do that. And this is why we need to, we need to turn the tables. They took Mein Kampf and then they published it. Then they also wrote a paper on... what was it? Dogs humping other dogs in a dog park is representative of rape culture.
Yeah. That's the one that I've heard. Yeah,
brilliant stuff, and it was used to demonstrate how far off the reservation we've really gone when we're looking for ways to. I would actually say, based on what you said about the decay comes with losing faith in the system. Which has created generations of people who feel powerless. Essentially, that's what you're saying, right? Mm-hmm. So we're powerless. We're also hopeless. We've been lied to. So these people come up with this crap to explain it away and find their own power. Today, Dr. Lindsay posted this, and this is to your point.
Okay, go ahead.
And I'm talking about what you were talking about was what power is doing currently, et cetera. Okay. They've become so accustomed to just manufacturing whatever public sentiment that they want that they don't realize that there are limits to the magic of alchemy. And with hundreds of millions of people around the world, the spell is already broken. This is no small point here, by the way. They literally believe that they can manufacture, by engineering the discourses, whatever public sentiment and mood they want. They think they can induce national calm by censoring people and tailoring what people hear and say. It's absolutely crucial to understanding what is happening now to understand the idea of discourse engineering, where they believe they can do social engineering by changing what people talk about and quite clearly achieve virtually any end with it. The postmodern philosopher Jean-Francois Lyotard called this legitimation by parology. By the way, and criticized it pretty effectively, given that he was Pomo and therefore a bit cuckoo and off the mark. On that point, but not all related points, he was right. Legitimation by parology roughly means manufacturing truth through forcing consensus, or in simpler language, creating social enforcement of lies that must be believed. Lyotard rightly recognized that this is a disaster. He wrongly believed that everything is that. In my recent essay on psychopathy and the origins of totalitarianism, I refer to this when it arises from ideology, as it usually does, as an ideological paralogic, a false logic that is used to argue for fake reality. They want to manufacture this. I'm a big fan of Dr. Lindsay, and I have read Lyotard's stuff, and this was something I recognized, although when you read his stuff, it doesn't read that straight. You really have to have somebody interpret it for you like he just did. The point being is that they manufacture truth by forcing consensus, by presenting an argument that if you disagree with, you are in the wrong to begin with. So you have no choice. You are no longer allowed to disagree. Therefore, hey, look, all these people agree with this. So we can silence people, we can call white people the root of all evil, we can say that there is no such thing as racism other than from white people, and you simply have to believe it. Because if you don't, then you live in an alternate reality.
I'm going to try to bring this into a little bigger picture, looking down on it. So are we saying, do you think that is it decay? Is this evidence of decay, or is it something else?
I think that it's kind of tough to say, because when you study the history of civilizations and what their catalyst for collapse is, it's generally that people don't have anything left to fight for. It's that they become fat, they become spoiled, and I've been watching that for the last 20 years going, look, all these fat, spoiled, entitled
we did
brats,
that, yeah. Right.
And so that is like, this is the one of the many signals of the end, and then the one of the other signals is how power responds to it by saying, hey, we'll give you the things that you're whining about that you don't have, you just have to give us more power.
Well,
You know,
and also if you know, and this isn't just the United States that we're talking about right now.
No.
Though. This decay is evident, and since we're in sort of a global system, this decay could be considered to be happening other places as well. So,
and that is something that is slightly different from anything we've seen before. You know, a lot of people like to refer to Rome. Well, the Roman Empire at its peak did actually encompass about 30% of the entire population of the planet. So you can look at that in a similar light, but you did have regional governors that ran, you know, the different conquered territories.
well, the end of the Bronze Age also would be kind of an example of.
Well, as far as
Yeah.
as far as the power shift,
Yeah, okay.
if that's what you're talking about, yeah. And we also saw this in ancient China. China was actually, it's funny when you study civilizations. China was ahead of the rest of the world by a solid 500 years in many different ways. I don't know if you're aware, they actually had gunpowder and rudders on ships, and
India for a while was ahead of them too. So
that's right. And
Yeah.
so this is also why I reject the notion of that this is, you know, that there's something that our systems are all based on a white supremacist idea, because, you know, all of the ideas that preceded what Europeans brought came from the East and the Far East and the Middle East.
Well, look, I'll just say this, and then we can move on because I'm not going to keep talking about it. But when we were hunter-gatherers, and then we started to grow shit, and we got an agricultural revolution happen, that is when hierarchies were started. That's where you had power, and that's where you had people that worked for power. And it's been like that ever since. And it doesn't matter who it is, it's always power. So we could have a white problem here, but it's still a power problem. And anytime you have oppressed versus oppression, it's always power. It doesn't matter what color it is. Yeah.
And this is one of the things that I know the book that you
and we've never found a different way to. We've never done it differently since then.
Well, think of it this way, though, and I've pointed this out to you before, and that is that because man is just a complicated mammal. You know, so point out a mammal that doesn't have a dominance hierarchy. Just name one. There aren't any.
They don't. Our egalitarian thing that we worked out there was pretty damn unique.
Yeah, and our cooperation between tribes was pretty unique as well. This is something that you know what, I gotta tell you, I have a great deal of respect for you, Martin. One of the things that you know, over the years I recommended to you the Jonathan Haidt book, and you just dug right in, and you know, and it was like, whoa, this is really cool. I'm going to read this too, and now it seems like you're just kind of.
It's whatever I'm reading at the time is takes over my worldview until I get bored with it and move on, and then I keep it on the file. I add it on and add it on.
Well, what I was about to say is that to keep in mind, I've described the Hegelian triad to you before, which is the idea that Hegel actually thought.
He keeps coming up. So I'm telling you, Hegel keeps coming up everywhere. So I'm bound to have to read that. Sorry, go ahead.
Good luck.
Yeah.
You know, good. I don't know if you ever saw this or not. I'm a member of the philosophy memes group, and it's kind of funny because they come up with these cool memes, and then we discuss. And the memes are very sophisticated, and you won't get them most often unless you studied philosophy, right? And I got to say, I'm a babe in the woods compared to some of these thinkers in there, you know. Somebody came into the group and posted, why is everybody challenged so much by Hegel? How come people don't like him? And I said, because anytime his name is brought up after attempting to read that stuff, I shit my pants, start drooling, and forget who I am for 45 minutes. You know, because it's truly so challenging to understand. But one of the things that I took away from Hegel was, and I've described this to you before, but and I believe I've brought it up here, is that he determined there is a point to mankind being here. You know, that there is a reason, and that reason is that, like anything else, mankind has a becoming that we haven't reached yet. You know, he even talked about, Eckhart Tolle talked about, well, it's obviously how a flower reaches its becoming, it blooms, it blossoms, and then when the sun goes down and it becomes cold, it pulls back into itself until the sun comes out again and it becomes. He even talked about how rocks and trees become, what their intended purpose, their spiritual purpose for the universe is. He's talking about mankind is supposed to reach what he called Geist, which is a state of oneness with God. The being as close to being what he determined God to be as possible. And he wasn't necessarily talking about a religious type of God. He could have been. He was, 18th century German philosopher, so he could have been. But the point here being is that there is what he called the triad, is that mankind builds its ideas based on a hypothesis or a thesis. And that thesis is, hey, I got an idea. Let's grow a bunch of shit. Because we can actually keep it, that's called wealth now. We need to build something around that wealth to protect it. So we're going to create a village with buildings, and we'll stash our food and the stuff that'll carry us through the winter there. Somebody's going to have to guard it. Somebody's going to have to be in charge of the guards. Somebody's going to have to be in charge of the fights that break out over resources and stuff. So here's our basic idea of law. That's the
somebody's got to invent time so you show up when you're supposed to do the work for me.
Something like that, right?
Yeah.
So then there's what he called antithesis, is that now that we have our village, we got all our people in charge, we have our wealth protected, now all kinds of shit that isn't working starts to present itself. These two fought about this, that, and the other thing, and justice is kind of one way. What we did was put the guy to death for stealing some corn. That seems a little extreme, so let's try something different next time. The people we put in charge were assholes, so we got to change something here. So the idea then, that's antithesis. So at some point or another, when it reaches a boiling point where no longer can it sustain itself, then we reach synthesis. Synthesis is where we go, all the original ideas like these here, this 3 or 4, these worked. These didn't. How do we fix the ones that didn't? Well, let's combine the ones that worked with some new ideas and synthesize new ones. The idea behind this, and one of the reasons I really loved it, Hegel was also a historian. And he treated history as instructive rather than just something that gave us wisdom. We could look at it and find reflections of ourselves in it. So that's why I loved, this idea so much, because if you look back in history, here's one of my favorite examples. How did politicians settle their disputes 200 years ago? Weehawken, 15 paces and pistols.
I would like to bring that back. I like that.
Well, it's just what I'm trying to illustrate is that there is a point. Do you
think there's hope? What you're trying to say is there's hope in that we're going to figure it out?
Yep. And I agree.
I think it all sounds like a desperate attempt to make all this shit mean anything.
Well,
we never had religion or God or philosophy or anything when we were, still in the Garden of Eden. It was only after we left it, we're like, oh shit, we need to figure out how this makes sense because it seems like we're all fucked up.
Well, and again, Mike, you remember what my question to you was? Is that if man is a natural part of this world, isn't what man does by extension natural?
Absolutely.
So that doesn't being the case,
it's going to work, but it's natural, right?
And the Garden of Eden lesson was really just about the natural balance that men are capable of good and evil, that their curiosity could be used for ill or for good, that their compulsions could actually destroy.
Now you have to work the soil for the rest of your life. You have to toil. That's not agriculture.
So. Well, of course it is, because when you think about where
that's
the Bible...
That's exactly what, it's telling you that you've left, right.
Let's get into this then.
Yeah, we get, all right? All right.
No, I'm going to make it, I will promise I'm going to make it brief, and then we're going to let Dustin in on the conversation. He's standing by right now. Yeah.
Good, let him in.
I'm going to make it brief, and that is that what I wrote my third-year thesis paper on was the history of religion as it is related to civilization.
Really?
Yes. So... The first recorded ideas of gods are about 11,000 years old, which kind of predates most civilization. But at that time, the gods were more like people. They were mystical human beings, not mystical in the term of like like druids or something. But they were like ethereal gods, but they were more like people. They had people's foibles, their folly. They were jealous, they were angry, they were greedy, but they were more like partners.
Can I ask you a question without throwing you off?
Yeah.
In that, did they ever talk about why the gods were invented? Did they ever say what purpose they served?
Well, of course, absolutely, because you can tell through the mythology, and this is, man, people get pissed when I refer to religion as a mythos, because when you study the history of it and you connect it all together, it is a mythos. That's what it is. Yeah. So yes, and of course it was to not necessarily just to explain the thunder or explain the drought, but it was also that the gods were kind of in charge of helping people get through a drought. They were in charge of helping people weather the storm. They were partners. They weren't evil or good deities that oversaw everything. They were there to help out. They were partners with man. You see, they were over, and the other thing
they were never interested in morality either. They were never
no. In fact, they were
morality at all.
That
came much later.
Some of the research that I did said that, that they were just flat out amoral, like people. They were like people, but they were more powerful. They were there to help with fertility and help corn grow. And because there was really no written language until around 3,800 years ago, the evolution of these ideas was really, really slow. So you had for a couple of thousand years that kind of, right now we're very used to, when you look at history through the lens of the present, how fast do things move in the world today? Communications changed everything. So communications developed in the East first. Society actually developed in the East first. The ancient Chinese religions weren't even necessarily about gods, but in finding wisdom in each other and in nature. And so,
are you talking about Taoism and Confucianism, or even
yeah? Well, Confucianism was much, much later, and again, I don't want to just spend 10 minutes on this. So, where I'm leading with this,
spend a whole show on this,
is that ultimately the very first of the monotheistic religions was Zoroastrianism, and the Zoroastrians were the first people to say that there is a single deity that is in charge of all things good, and then there is a devil, a dark deity that is in charge of all things bad.
They fucking did a Walmart on religion. That was smart of them. They're getting
right around that same time, the Semitic people were actually nomads. They moved back and forth across the steppes. From the Middle East, the Far East, and in Mesopotamia. So they were collecting the Chinese mythos, the Indian mythos, and then the Middle Eastern, which was Zoroastrianism. And then by the time they got it back to Mesopotamia, there was a guy who lived there named Abraham. And Abraham took all of that, well, there's one God, and here's the, in charge of the dark and the light, and here's all of the things that these people told me about agriculture and about how humans were more pure when they were more connected to survival than they were to wealth. I'm going to write a whole, it's Abraham's, Moses's descriptions of what the beginnings of the world are actually elegant and beautiful. And they're not technically accurate, but they're accurate from the standpoint of the lore that was created from the very first of those gods, all the way through the Zoroastrians, et cetera, et cetera.
There's tons of wisdom in all those Old Testament stories. As long as you're not taking it literally,
it's really kind of a description. Mankind,
all of them do, but all the religions. I mean, they were all in some way or another served the power. That was really ultimately what they were doing. I mean, they came out of a way to try to. Are we bringing in somebody?
No, that's Eric. He hello, Eric from Venezuela. Right on.
You got my oil?
So, right. Yeah, can you bring us back some? No, there's no food there. I was going to have him pick us up some takeout. The point being, and I know that I didn't mean to get this deep into the weeds, but the point being is
what were we talking about? I have no idea. I don't think anybody else does. Yeah.
Well, the original point was that you have continuously said, look, when we were actually struggling to survive, we didn't have any sort of hierarchies.
Who said struggling to survive? I didn't say that.
Hunter-gathering is struggling to survive. There is no wealth, no surplus. Because any surplus you'd have to bring with you.
Into struggling to survive, though.
If there's no surplus, then what you ended up doing was killing the weakest members of your own group in order to survive.
I don't
it wasn't detailed in that book. You might want to read anthropologists rather than philosophers turned economists that write books of anthropology. You know what I'm saying? It's just you've read one book on it, and there's a bunch of stuff that guy left out.
I've read a lot of. I have actually researched a lot, and there's a lot. I mean, there is definitely some people seem to have they have a interest in creating this narrative that the hunter-gatherer life was fantastic, and then you have, and so that's you have to read through that, but they weren't dying in their 40s. They, their lives, and I'm sure it depended on where you were a hunter-gatherer. Whether there was success and unsuccess, but they weren't struggling to survive. They did pretty well. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't still have humans.
No, it's true.
Yeah, they did millions of years, and then we've only been around for 10,000 years.
Well, and again, so let's talk about this, though. I said that essentially communication is what revolutionized the world, right?
Language is the great oppressor, according to
Again, I was going to say, language is what screwed everything up, too, because now we had words to divide each other. This is why I sent you, when you were reading that, I sent you that video on Marx. Because a lot of the stuff, that the perspective this was written from, was about alienation. Was the alienation, Marx's alienation.
I was unaware that was one of Marx's key things. I didn't know that. I went and looked into it. So,
Dustin is now a part of the program here.
Am I here?
You are. Well, I don't know. I mean, that is talk about philosophy. There's a question for you right there. Do I really here? Do I really exist?
Or am I just you guys were talking about Peter Boghossian and James.
Peter Boghossian, that's who I was looking for. Yeah,
it was like, oh, yeah, Peter. Yeah, that's who you couldn't remember. It's Peter Boghossian.
So I take it you heard what I read as far as that. What I read to you from James Lindsay came from his Twitter feed today, where he was talking about manufacturing truth. Is what power does in order to achieve a consensus that allows them to transfer more power to themselves. Yeah. And I thought he said it really eloquently, and that's why I brought it up, Martin, because I had copied it to OneNote, which is where I keep all of my information, as you know, because I thought it was really poignant. It was a great description of what is going on right now when we look around. So I asked Martin the question of, are we currently in a state of natural decay as an empire, or is this being accelerated or even manufactured by power for their own ends? I'm catching you up, Dustin. And he argued that what possible benefit could power have by speeding up the destruction of what they have power over is essentially what I believe you were asking. Is that right, Martin?
It is. I think that another question is sort of distilled outside of this too, is that in this natural decay process, if that is what's happening on, then power is going to also respond predictably to that decay and try to tighten their grip on power, which is, I think, something that you might be describing. That perhaps that is what's going on.
And it's not only that, but I think it's kind of like, the most powerful rats on a sinking ship. If the ship is sinking, they are going to, and there's only so much room, they're going to start booting people over the side so that there's still enough resources to sustain them. So why would power be, grabbing for more power as something is falling apart? Because power rises to the top.
So are they responding to it, or are they causing it, or is it both?
I think that it's both. I think that they have created an acceleration by fostering purposefully the kind of divides that allow them to gather more power, because this is what power does. And I'll give you some Gramsci to read. Antonio Gramsci was a philosopher who kind of cemented the idea of hegemony. So Dustin is actually somebody who is really familiar with Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay's work as it relates to how their power is twisting philosophy, as I'd mentioned earlier, into a bunch of new and exciting shapes that it was never meant to hold, in order to manufacture more power for people that aren't even necessarily in government, but can influence government. So go ahead, Dustin.
No, so that's kind of where we're at with this thing right now, is that, I saw Martin's position as he's kind of pessimistic on it, like, meh. And you're kind of in a both, but from my perspective, it's definitely going to be power that's perverted by these things that have been infiltrated that are not natural. They're not natural logically. So by that I mean is that, I'm sorry, the cat's purring in the microphone.
That's all right, man. I've got a few.
What I mean by that is that when you have people who have been, it's like an infection, and that's something that both Peter and James talk about. Or even Gad saw it cause it, brain parasite of some sort. When you have people who are trying to acquire power, they find a way to do it by means of persuasion, and they find these tactics. And I'm sorry, let me back that up.
Go ahead, relax, man.
So it's hard to extrapolate it without trying to go back and do a history lesson. So,
which is why I end up being so long-winded sometimes. I
to
need to give you background so that you understand what I'm talking about. So go ahead. It's cool, man.
So if I were to shorten it up the best I can, the powers that are in charge now, the government that we're going to have here very shortly, a vast majority of them have always believed for a long time that academia was kind of the authority, and usually the right would always look at traditional values of Christianity as the authority, and those kind of would always meld together. Academia was infected with a virus, which is critical theory, and of course I call it modern critical theory, because critical theory in itself, as me and Christian have discussed many times, is actually
it's actually very utilitarian.
Yes, it goes back and it's changed into something completely different. So when we get into this part of it, is that academia is, through decades of changes and everything else, has created these critical theory things where everything needs to be deconstructed. And a lot of these deconstructions have gone into the social sciences, to where they've found that a lot of these Marxist ideas, they've taken the economic Marxist ideas and kind of incorporated it into these social structures. And it's actually quite brilliant. Believe it or not, it's as silly as it is, and it's not even scientific, but the philosophy behind it is actually interesting. But because the left has always relied on academia so heavily, they basically take this critical theory as gospel and kind of push it as as the Mandalorian would say, this is the way.
That's actually a really good metaphor.
Yeah, it's just this is the way. And if you find that you're talking to somebody who, this is what's crazy, is I've had probably over the since probably Monday. When was that court thing? Was that the 6th? So that was last Wednesday, right?
That was last week, dude.
Okay.
The court thing, huh?
I've had so
You mean
many,
the storming the Capitol with the insurrectionists?
Yeah. I've had so many arguments with people because everyone generalizes so many things, that I can tell when somebody has bitten off that apple of critical theory, but they don't know what that is. Meaning they're just regurgitating what's coming through politics and media, these talking heads. They're just repeating it. And they don't even know what they're talking about, because when I try and confront them in the argument, saying, well, that's a logical fallacy, there's nothing that proves this. You can't even statistically find anything on this stuff. It's just literally a conclusion that was just projected out into there.
Well, so let me just rewind just a little bit, because what critical theory, essentially, the idea behind it, was to, for example, this is one of my favorites, actually. Do you ever think about why we stick a tree with lights on it in our house every December? No. Instead, you're actually born into a system where that is tradition, and we just kind of do it. But when you think about why, does it make any sense that we do it at all? So I actually found a great definitive history on Christmas trees. But the idea is to challenge all of those things, to go, Why do I wear a T-shirt instead of a button-down? When did this happen? And these are very basic things. But then let's talk about where did the idea of racism come from, and why do we accept it the way it is? Let's tear that apart. Yep. The idea behind critical theory is it's like the original philosophy behind it was deconstructionism. Yes. Where you would take these complex structures, these complex social structures, mental structures, environmental and government structures, and just raise them to the ground to find out, then pick through the ashes and see, where it leads you. The idea, it's like it's a great mental exercise. It's a great way to reimagine the world around you too, is to go, wait a minute, we've simply just done this de facto. How come? This is a terrible idea. After I've deconstructed it, I've been critical of all of this, and I think of a better way. That was the utility. From there, it actually led into postmodernist. And postmodernist was kind of One of the tenets of postmodernism was the idea of philosophy should be conducted like science, in that you should be able to have a process of rigor that proves it. If it doesn't prove it, it's not valid.
Correct.
So that being the case, philosophy deals with humanity and personal and truth, not fact. Science is about fact, not truth. That being the case, you take critical theory, and then you take deconstructionist ideas, postmodernist theory, and now you have a system that says that everything we believe is subjective, that there's no such thing as objective truth or objective reality or objective morality. Mm-hmm. Therefore, if I decide that I identify as a buffalo, I am a buffalo, and if you say otherwise, you are oppressing me.
Quick example.
Yeah.
A man and a women.
I almost peed myself laughing. I have
so
to be
did I.
honest. It was so goddamn funny.
So this is kind of where we're seeing things. This has been a long time coming. Like I've told Christian, I've been aware of this for quite some time. It was the Evergreen incident with Brett Weinstein that just blew my mind. I'm like, that's where I realized this is not.
It's actually reached. It's become a real thing at this point.
It's a real thing because it was panned by the media. It was panned all the time as being just kind of hokey pokey, bullshit. But the problem is that now it's in culture, but it's not just in culture. It's infected into our journalism. It's infected into our government. And when you get these crazy, nonsensical ideas, but they're being pushed through policy, and especially, let me back that up just a little bit. The reason why, like me, I get constantly accused of being some sort of Trumpy right-winger.
Me too.
But only because I push back on this critical theory stuff. I mean, it's near and dear to me because, I don't want to, I'm going to make this very short. Probably go back to 2015 into 2016, I'm a musician. I have lots of fans and friends that I started seeing people literally start going crazy. And I wanted to know why. What the hell is going on? This person I've known for 20 years just went batshit crazy. And they're saying stuff that does not make sense. It's just not making sense to me, and it's irrational. And so,
things like what? As far as like third wave feminism, or that everything that we look at is the product of white supremacy, or all of the above. Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure that we give some context to what it is you're referring to when you say people are.
The context would be is that those are like, again, we go back into there's no epistemology to this thing. It's just this is what it is, and you must believe it. And to me, that's what religion is to me, is that you just have to have faith in it and don't question it. And to me, that as soon as something like that happens, of course I'm going to question it. I'm going to push back really, really hard. And I became very sensitive to it, and I've been diving into this thing for years. So when James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian, when I heard about them on the podcast on Joe Rogan, those guys were literally in my head through those papers. I was laughing my ass off because they were basically exploiting the whole system of ridiculousness.
So you're referring to the hoaxed academic papers that they wrote,
And of course, in most of my arguments, I try not to go to have a call to authority on those, but that's your evidence, because someone will always argue with it and say, "Well, where's your proof?" Well, I can tell you that there's just no scientific evidence to it, but if you really want to see people who exploit the system, here you go. But the point so let's go back into the power thing. What happens when you have nonsensical, illogical and nonsensical beliefs like this is that when you feel like that there's imagine if Christians, the right side and the Christians were very what are they always accused of doing? The Handmaid's Tale. They always, we're going to be, the left would be like, we're going to become the hands.
We're actually going to be sent back to the way it was in the 50s. Women will be subverted and will be barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. And there is absolutely no evidence to support the idea that anybody wants that.
Yeah,
outside of a very small group of people that don't have the power to pull that kind of thing off.
Exactly. And so what happens is that if the roles were reversed, if there was a large swath of, all of a sudden, instead of academia, it was all church and Christianity, and it just infected into I don't want to use the word infected, that's actually not a good word, but it just is inside the culture, our culture, and everyone is on board with that, we would go that direction, and we would start seeing a power push in that direction. But the problem
That's a fair point, and that's kind of what Lindsay was saying today. By essentially, it's funny too because, and I'm just going to cut in for 1 second here. Noam Chomsky is a linguist. I think many people are familiar with him. He wrote a book in '92 that I can't recommend highly enough called "Manufacturing Consent." And that is essentially what it is that Leotard was arguing for, is that you can create a narrative, get enough people on board to where everybody else just kind of goes, oh, that's the way it is? Okay, cool.
Yeah. And that's kind of, yeah.
And so what you're talking about is that power has the ability to drive those kinds of narratives and get us all doing this while we transfer more power to them. You know, or create a nation of people that want to subvert women, for example. Go ahead, Martin.
You could go either way.
I noticed that from an listening in, you always hear power, and we haven't put a name or a face or identified it yet.
Sure. Fair point.
And if we're talking about how there's going to be this civil war, then from my perspective, what I'm hearing, and you can tell me if this is, I'll put this out there, and then you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. That there's power structure now that's the Democratic left-wing party that is very connected to corporations. And then on the other side of that, do we have the Republican Party? Are they a separate side, or are they?
Wait. This is it's important to clarify.
Or is it just all one thing?
I think it's all one thing. I don't. You know what I decided? I did the very best I could a couple of years ago on the tank. I said, I'm going to do everything I can not to refer to groups as left, right, progressive.
I remember that.
You remember that?
I want to ask you, how do we talk about it if we don't use that?
So I realized that to me, they're both sides of the same coin, because their ethos fluctuates. Mm-hmm. You know, so we might have a party that's like, wait a minute, you know what, man? It's clear that these rules, these laws have been abused for years. Let's see what we can actually do for our own constituents and our people. And I think it kind of goes up and down. But either way, it's still power. And
so it's this political ruling class then.
Well, it's a political ruling class. It is the people that fund it. It is in its academia, without a doubt, when you have people that can come out and write a book like White Fragility, which is rife with errors. It is really kind of terrifying to read it. Let me give you a slight example.
A very racist book,
right now, it is a bestseller. It is being used as a foundation for for corporate discussions on inclusivity. Okay. It's finding its way into schools. To me, that's power. But one of the things that the author, Robin DiAngelo, says in the book is that questions about her theory, if you want to even call it that, you can't falsify it, so it's not even a theory. It's a bad idea. It doesn't even rise to the idea to the level of a hypothesis, if you ask me. But the point being is that she has said that questions are permitted. You can question what she's talking about, question this idea, question this philosophy, to the extent that when the answers are given to you, you agree. Otherwise, your questioning of it is proof. It is evidence or proof, whichever word you want to use. In this case, they're interchangeable. That of your white fragility. It is proof of your racist intentions. It is proof that you have internalized your own racism.
You know,
without saying, and here's why. There is no here's why.
That book is intellectually dishonest and insulting because it reads to me like she has this like personal, these are my personal experiences.
That's the way she wrote it. These are the thoughts
that come through my head.
And she got it. She got her.
But she doesn't really have power. I mean, she's got an idea.
Are you kidding?
You're saying that this idea is co-opted by power.
Yes.
As being part of
the idea is co-opted by power.
Which actually by default means that she has power. Because let's say that her publisher goes, wow, this went big. This is huge. It made you rich. It made us rich. You need to write another one.
So when we're talking about power, we're not talking about any sort of consolidated thing. We're just talking about the different ways in which somebody can get a certain amount of power in our society. So if that's coming, and we say that power perhaps is either part of it or not part of it, then they're going to benefit from this civil war, or they're not going to. I'm trying to figure out who is supposed to benefit.
Well, that would depend.
Like I said, man, if the ship is actually sinking, which I'm not sure that it is, I'm not sure yet.
It's moving slowly. I don't.
But like I said, if you're on a sinking
It
ship
needs a spark.
and you're the one
spark.
with the sword, you're going to start cutting people up that are taking your spot as the water rises, and you're climbing up to where it's still dry. You're going to start using that sword, and that's why power wants to consolidate. Power protects itself.
So if we start to see Belfast happen here, that's what it might look like. This insurgency came out. We're going to see some bombs going off.
Go ahead and give some background on the Belfastian Civil War.
Well, I don't.
It's not even really civil war. It was more of a
Protestants versus
well, what I was
it was more of a religious thing.
Yeah. Well, you go ahead if you want to, Dustin. I was using that when we were going to talk about whether there's going to be a civil war. I was going to say that we are in the pre-stages and it's not going to look anything like the first civil war that we had.
I think Martin, you might actually have a good point, because I have many discussions online with many different people, and I have a few who are convinced that there is going to be two factions and they're marching across each other with guns. And I'm like, no. See, we're in a 5th generation warfare system. It's going to be two things. It's going to be propaganda, and it's going to be pop shots, meaning just like in Belfast, where, there might be a little bit of a skirmish, mostly IEDs planted and blowing up. It's going to be these pot shots that are going to go wrong. And I mean, that went on for decades.
It's been going on for a long time. Yeah.
Yes. And so we have basically those, and this is where I was going with the whole thing with the critical theory and these things that the liberals, and I hate to say liberals, I'm just saying they're the ones right now that believe in this stuff. And it's just what it is. I don't know anyone that leans center right or right that buys into the critical theory thing.
I don't know anybody in center left that does either, frankly.
It's true.
But is the Civil War going to be fought over critical theory?
What's that?
Is the Civil War going to be fought against critical theory?
Well, no. I think what we're talking about here is
a weapon. It's going to be used as a cudgel.
You wanted earlier, Martin, to talk about your idea was to talk about what created this current condition.
Yes.
And one of the things that you brought up is that the mythology, the mythos of America and what America stands for has been torn to shreds over the years, right? And now these kinds of things are popping up because if I was an academic that couldn't find my space, my own power, my own way of becoming, if you will, in writing good things about the country as it began to decay, I'd be going, okay, here's all the shit that's wrong with it and why, and here are the groups of people that are responsible for it. So what does that do? It accelerates the collapse.
Yes.
I've been arguing for a while. One of the things that David Peters...
We should see universities getting bombed. That should definitely be a target.
I would imagine that the right wing faction might actually do that. That's entirely possible.
I would predict that's a possibility. I think so. Going back to our power struggle, and Martin is trying to put his finger on where it is, where centralization is on this, which I can answer that. And currently, as we are, you saw my post concerning America's fascism, which is going to be coming into play because we have two merging monopolies. We have a government monopoly,
government and corporate power,
right?
Government and corporate power who are and they're going in there. But the thing that's really terrifying to me about it is that those two monopolies have control of culture as well, and culture is pretty much where everything happens in society. So once they have control of all these things, there is no stopping it. That's where your power is. So it's not so much that you're going to have one guy who's going to be pointing around and saying, we're going to go do and execute all these things. You're going to have a whole cohesion of monopolies who agree on the same thing. And they're going to push that in that direction. Now, this is where things get kind of sensitive, is that when you have something that's like, going back to the A men and A women, in this ridiculousness like such, when you have people who have a religious fervor like that, I mean, you both are, I'm assuming, atheists to some degree, correct?
I am.
All right, you're agnostic. Okay, fair enough.
Long story, semantics. Schematics, yeah.
No, it's fair enough because
Yeah.
I just want to kind of know so I can know how to put this example. Have you ever tried to have a conversation? Well, actually, Christian just did this today.
You saw that.
Have a conversation with someone kind of questioning God. Have you ever gone to a Christian and says, "Well, I don't believe in a sky daddy. Can you prove it?" Have you watched how fucking pissed they get? They get enraged. They will become enraged because you're now pushing the boundaries of their peace. They cannot disprove. You can't disprove it, but they can't prove it. But once you set up the stage for this and you say, "Hey, I would like some evidence, and if you can provide the evidence, I might be able to go along with you." But they just become more and more pissed off about it.
This is how
people in the critical theory field function. If you question that belief system and ask for evidence,
you are basically a heretic.
Yeah, you are a heretic.
You are heretical to that because their philosophy is not rooted in any epistemological foundations at all.
Yes.
It is cherry picking bits from different, like I said, from actually.
Why is it attractive? How does this? I mean,
because it confers power to people who feel powerless.
Yes, it basically has. It's like a
end game of this power. Like if we were going to go up against it and try to stop it, why would we want to stop this from happening?
We're actually doing it right now.
Yeah.
Right now, we still have the ability to go on here and discuss these things and have people. And I would love to, this is why I've had David Peters on the show. We are supposedly political opposites. One of the things that I find interesting is the more I talk to him, the more I think that we actually are very much the same. Our prescriptions are different. But in terms of what it is that we're able to observe being problems, and things that I would have disagreed with him being problems on before, now I understand. This is the point. This is how we combat it. And I can tell you that, unfortunately, what's going to happen is that blood will have to be spilled first. We can't skip over that part.
Human beings historically don't sit down and talk until a lot of people have been killed.
And that's what I keep saying to people is that I just was watching.
When we finally get sick of killing people is when we're like, all right, let's talk this out.
Yeah, and we can't, for whatever reason, we can't just skip to that part. We have to actually go through that first. A comedian I used to like was like, that Iran and Iraq have been at war for like 100 years, and they don't even remember why anymore. It's spelled with an N. No, it's spelled with a Q. And I'm going, that's how I kind of feel about this now, because we have arguments about, if you go to the side that absolutely hates Trump, everything's it's an insurrection. They're trying to illegally overturn an election. There's like no nuance, no complexity, no details that could make a difference in understanding why somebody like you actually saw it, Dustin. I had David on last night, who is absolutely, there was no malfeasance, nothing wrong with this election. It was 100% fine. There was no anything wrong with it at all. And then Troy comes on, who actually went through the legal briefs. He read them, which I don't know if you guys have ever tried that or not.
I did too.
It's like trying to read Hegel. Anyway, so what we ended up with, and if you watched it all the way through, Dustin, you saw me at the end going, okay, look, David, do you think Troy is dumb? Or is he a reasonable person that is obviously intelligent, that has a position that, while you might not agree with it, should you treat him like he's an imbecile in this regard? Or is it because he is a conservative or a Republican that's the only reason that he believes it? To me, that's the problem. Yep. Is like I said earlier to you, Martin, when I was talking about Clint today, when I was saying that he rejected my source, or criticized my source because it was, quote, right-leaning. And my answer when people always say that is, would you like me to find you a left-leaning one that says the same thing? You know what I mean? And then, honestly, I haven't had a thread that didn't go dead yet on that.
Yeah.
All of a sudden it's like, well, no, I don't want to hear the same thing from somebody I agree with.
Most people, unfortunately, are intellectually lazy. They have a confirmation bias they're going to shove at you, but when they're asked, when they don't like your answer, they're going to want you.
It's hard fucking work to start thinking. I'm somebody that didn't start thinking until late.
Yeah.
And it was a rough 2 years. When I was that first brick that came out, I got to rebuild this whole fucking thing.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
Well, he kicked me in the nuts.
It's not for the tame of heart to go through that kind of stuff. It takes an intellectual courage, and you feel like you're walking without a net. All those beliefs that I had was like the safety net. It was easy to fall into them. They were comfortable, they were soft, they were warm, and I was always right.
Well, believe it or not, Martin, I was like you for a good majority of my life. I was pretty far left leaning, and even though I was raised conservative in a fairly religious family, I was pretty independent. And I mean, I moved out when I was like 16, and I was extremely left leaning. And it wasn't until probably midway through Obama's second term, I started getting a little disenfranchised. Not with him, so to speak, but people around me when they were basically agreeing with things that I was like, well, you would have agreed with that 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 6 years ago. Now it's okay. I started seeing like a lack of principle, and that bothers me. So Go ahead.
Well, I pointed out to David last night that that I think that what happens, now that our whole conversation has really been about power, right?
Yes.
And about how power is, in my estimation, responsible for dividing people. That makes that division, makes those people responsible for the blood that's coming. You see what I'm saying? That was my America. It is your fault rant.
Yeah.
This is your freaking fault, man. And you got to stop saying that one side is better or different than the other, because they're not. Because the outcomes are the same. What are we going to judge them on their intentions or what they did? That's what I'm talking about. So
I've been trolling a fairly well-known heavy metal band recently because of that.
I actually saw. Did you see Tony Webster's what he said today about John Schaefer? I was shocked. Because John, they know each other, and he openly just blasted him, and I was like, good for you. That takes courage, So anyway, Martin, I
want to pose a question to both of you. So, so if we are heading towards a civil war, or if we're already kind of in the beginnings of a cold starting one, the insurgents haven't made themselves, whatever. If it is coming, it is happening, and the three of us here are smart enough to see that it's a real potential. Christian, as a historian, you definitely know the patterns and whatnot. Is there any motivation for power, as you stated, to stop this from happening? Or
that was where I was going. I was going to answer that question.
Well, then go ahead, Dustin.
Yeah. So from what I can extrapolate from what's happening, I mean, Christian has his historical thing. I'm just looking at it from what they're actually doing, what they're saying. And they're not, how we are human beings, we have the ability to succumb to sin. And I'm not even saying that in a religious way. I'm saying we have the ability to be tempted to greed and other things. I mean, it's just something that we're predisposed to. But when you're talking about people who have power or trying to gain power because they feel, first of all, they have moral superiority. They know better. So once we start there, if they have to push the moral superiority forward onto everybody else, they're going to do it no matter what. Whether you like it or not, this is, you sit down, shut up, and we're going to do this. The problem we have is that, and that Jordan Peterson said it best, the right knows when they've gone too far. The left doesn't seem to know when to stop. And that's where I'm kind of seeing it going are they going to put more judges on the bench? Are they going to make more states? I don't know. And I kind of don't care. But when we start talking about how they're actually, like, they change the rules in the House, you can get censored for using gendered language. When I see stuff like that, I'm getting concerned. The moment I'm going to say we're going to go, civil war's here, we're going, is when they start moving the goalposts. Because at that point, they just don't care anymore because they intend to hold power.
Again, there is no objectivity.
So once we eliminate all objectivity and it's all going to be subjective reasoning, well, that's an oxymoron.
Then it's not. So then it's not. So then is this a fair statement? Then what possibly that we're going to see is that we're going to see protests. We're going to see bombings like Belfast. That's going to happen as a response to this power, and that's going to give power more justification to be even more authoritarian, and they'll be able to shut down more, and then you'll see that battle between those two sides.
Unfortunately, you're correct. If if I was a betting man, and if we were to have some people who are going to be very angry, because right now we have 70 million people who feel absolutely disenfranchised and feel like their voice wasn't heard. And not only was their voice not heard, they made a few small portion, we're talking less than 100, made a really dumb decision that just pretty much the entire media sphere went, oh, see, we've been saying it, and we're right. We gotta.
What
shut
took
this
you guys
down.
so long? Is what I think they said.
Yeah, pretty much. Oh, it took you so long. It's about time.
Yeah.
We've been doing this for 4 years, but you're just here to the game. But we're going to shut you down again. It comes to the
now
fact
we've got you,
and they control the media, and they have control of culture. So what's going to happen here is all of a sudden these people are going to just start getting ejected from society. And what happens when you eject people from society and they feel they don't have value? They be very, very angry. And they're going to start thinking and doing things that are absolutely unreasonable.
Let me
things
add
they
something
normally
to
would
that.
not do.
Let me add something to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
There are a whole bunch of people in the Twitter sphere. There's a whole bunch of people on social media and the news that are cheering the silencing of the president. Mm-hmm. What surprised me today is that there was an article that said that the ACLU thought that it was a very dangerous thing for them to do. We also got an article. Yeah, the ACLU over the last couple of years has had some serious struggles with defending free speech, even though that's what they've done historically. I don't know if you saw it, Dustin. I actually did a video. Did you see it, Martin?
I've seen all your videos. It was one of your.
It was one of my production videos. Yeah,
I've seen all of them.
And I talked about how the ACLU. Actually, letters were written to at the time, the commissioner of the ACLU saying, we really have to figure out whether we value free speech more than doing what is right. Ooh.
That's terrifying.
So in any case, I also posted an article today on Skeptic Tank on Facebook about the way some of the world leaders had reacted to it. Angela Merkel, for example, thought it was a very dangerous and strange thing for the U.S. to be doing.
My opinion on that would be, and it's just basically because my wife is German and so is her mom, is that.
Können Sie Deutsch sprechen?
Yeah.
Können Sie Deutsch sprechen? Ja. Ein bisschen?
This was very little.
Very little. Yeah, I can see that.
So she's more concerned with the fact that it's private companies that have this power and not the government. That's her concern. For her, that's weird. Like, why would you let private people have
that much power
down?
Well,
here we would do it. The government would do it. Why would you do it that way? That's her concern.
The way I framed it a few days ago, again on one of the posts on Skeptic Tank on Facebook, was and this is something I think you picked up on, and we discussed it on Saturday night with David, was that the definition of fascism really is it's national. The nationalistic part of it was simply Mussolini's way of again creating a complicity in his people by saying we are Italians and we are superior, and so they all went, yeah, and you want to do what? Okay, fine, go do it. It's essentially. But it really is a marriage of government and corporate power. Corporations being the private arm of a government that can't be private.
Yes.
Okay, so that it actually adds power to the government when you have corporations involved.
It really surprises me, Christian, how so little people actually understand what fascism is.
This blows me away. Oh, Donald Trump's a fascist. Clue. You know what, man? Shut up. That's one of those type 1 hyperbolic aggressors that I talk about.
Well, it's like they found a word that sounds cool and it sounds slanderous.
No, they didn't find it. They were taught that. That was
I was watching a movie from the 80s where they were. I was watching a movie from the 80s where some character in there was calling someone who was really kind of staunchy conservative a fascist. And I'm like, well, this goes all the way back to the 80s.
Oh, it goes back farther than that.
It seems like we have these emotional words, and that's where we get into emotions versus logic. We have these things that we have like the very worst examples, even if we don't understand how they gave it a being. And anytime somebody's bad, we'll go, "Oh, you're a Nazi. Oh, you're a white supremacist. You're a fascist. Oh, you're a socialist. Oh, you're Venezuela." Each kind of group has these things.
Oh, you're Venezuela.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
Venezuela's like, what do we do?
Yeah, this is the essence of the kind of power I'm talking about, because I guarantee you, I promise you, that people that are in a position where they can drive this kind of cultural divide know that. They know
They
how
do.
people respond. They know what words they use. Now, we live in a world where artificial intelligence gathers up everything that we say, everything that we do, everything we respond to, the kind of food that we eat. Actually, I don't know if I shared this with you guys or not. You're going to love it. I read an article last month, and it's a periodical I get as a network security professional, where they were talking about how Google can now tell what times of day and how often you take a crap.
That would not surprise me in the least.
They know, they can figure it out, and because the AI looks at the kind of food that you bought, your credit card receipts, what are you paying for, blah blah blah. How often then you go buy it over time, which then breaks it down to how often you eat these particular things on these particular days, etc. That kind of metadata.
This explains why I kept getting advertisements for Squatty Potty for a period. Because boy,
You clicked on something, man.
Or you talked about it and your phone heard you.
This guy's got to change his diet.
You're on that right age. You eat the right foods.
This is what bothers me the most. The very most is that I have said that people are extremely easily manipulated animals, especially in groups. A person can be intelligent, can be skeptical, can be joyous, can be angry, can be accommodating, can be compassionate. People, on the other hand, are a dangerous animal, and they should always be regarded as such.
People are unpredictable. Groups are not.
People can be, but the point being is that the AI is then packaged and said, okay, I have all of this information on people that you, Mr. Power, want to vote for you and provide you with more power and money. So we have broken it all down to the exact phrases, the exact words, the exact timing, the exact time of day, time of night, the way it's going to be delivered, that you can use these things that we're going to now sell you to manipulate this particular group into doing what you need them to do to either help you gain or maintain your power. So we now have, and what's really interesting, I'm actually going to share my screen so that you can all see this. I know you saw it yesterday because I posted it on Skeptic Tank, but I think in terms of what it is that I'm currently sharing with you, that this is quite pertinent. Let's share my screen. Here it is. These are the companies that gather that data. And look who they sold it to, via donations in this case. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying here? This is power. This is what power looks like in the 21st century.
Those donations were meant to get Biden elected. Am I correct to say that?
I don't, frankly, I don't know. What it's saying is that this was big tech campaign support. Owner, employee, family, and political action group donations combined.
So why do we think all these groups here are liberal? Why is all of tech liberal? Is it because they're young? They've gone to the schools that have indoctrinated them, and they're housed in areas that are liberal.
Well, okay, so let's talk about that.
That's a good point.
And that is actually a great point. That's an outstanding question, and frankly, I think we can probably come up with a couple of different ways to explain that. But this is also where you have to stay in academic circles for a long time to reach that kind of a point. Now, of course, there are some outliers. For example, Bill Gates left Harvard. He did not finish school. I believe Steve Jobs did not either. I think Wozniak was actually a graduate. But at the same time, this was I hate to say this, but the idea of a conservative is somebody who is part of that synthesis or the thesis and antithesis and synthesis part, is that the people that are conservative are part of the thesis part. They want to hold on to the things that are good. That's why they're conserving these ideas, right? The ones that are solid and that work. Sometimes they want to conserve ideas that are bullshit and don't. But that's kind of the nature of it, right? Yep. The people who create something as powerful as Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, they are the ones that are looking well beyond all of that stuff. And what they're trying to do, in my estimation, is create that better world like we see in Star Trek, where there's no such thing as money and everything's very communistic. And, at least if you were to try and make you make hay over it. Personally, it's fantasy. So is communism working. But the point being is that these kind of the people who helm companies like this are not the same people who helm companies that make jet engines. General Dynamics, for example. is General Dynamics looking to make the world a better place, or are they looking to blow the fucking world up? Or at least sell weapons to people that might. You see what I'm saying? I think there's a pretty clear distinction there. And right now I'm just riffing. You asked a question and I'm coming up with an answer. I love David trolling over here. Well, because Trump threatened them. That's why. So the other place that I would go with that is that this is Apple's CEO, Tim Cook, is gay. He's openly gay. Up until recently, that was something that largely conservatism may not have embraced. Okay, so Tim Cook's in his 60s at this point, so I would say that throughout his life, conservatives pushed against him. So, where else would you go? So I think that might be fair to say. Again, and I'm riffing, I'm hypothesizing. I really don't know.
There's many factors that are going to push that in that direction. I think there's one other concept that we haven't discussed, but I've had other discussions with is that we've looked at the concept that the liberals are hedging their bet, or the big tech is hedging their bets with who they think is going to benefit them.
Yeah, that was my point to the whole thing. Yeah.
Because in all honesty, when you're looking at corporations and you're looking at government, and if we are going to go down that rabbit hole of how we have a semi-quasi-fascistic economy due to the interactions between government and business, it's kind of like we're seeing the fallout of what happens when business gets so big. They pretty much are the government. But what's funny is this also goes into another. We could talk about why we wouldn't just be going anarcho-capitalist. I mean, that's something Brent would just be jumping up and down about right now. But the problem is that it is all about power. That's why we never see anarcho-capitalism happen. Is because
there is no centralized power in a non-system.
Yeah, you can't get there. And plus, people, when you think about it, when you try to describe it to people, they start having questions. So unless they've read The Fountainhead or something, you're like, well,
those fuckers, how dare they question this insane idea?
So I have a question. They would be like, so what happens if somebody can't get a job? And they're like, well, fuck them. That's the attitude. And they're like, well, that's a system I don't want to have. But when you present somebody with the other side of the system where it's like, oh, well, we're just going to be a happy utopia and everyone's going to be taken care of. They're like, well, that sounds a lot better. But when you talk about anarcho-capitalist, and that's kind of funny because I always tease a friend of mine, Mark. He's the guitarist who's played a band of me. He's an anarcho-capitalist. I always would make fun of it. I'm like, dude, the problem with your ideas is that when you try and sell it, it's like someone wanting to buy a car and they're, hey, is this car pretty good? It's like, fuck, you're going to have to buy a new car in 10 years, but here you go.
But here you go.
You can't sell it. You cannot sell that idea. They're terrible salesmen at the idea, but they try and say, well, just read The Fountainhead. Just read, Sam Rand, and you'll get into it, and you'll understand why we want to go this direction.
And I can tell you right now that one of my biggest beefs is, and you've all watched me debate people online. You've all done it. Some of you have participated. And I'm sure that at least I hope one of the things that you notice is that when people challenge me for evidence, I'm able to repeat it without simply linking them to something. Mm-hmm. So when somebody goes, here's what you need, I'm like, wait a minute, no. I want to hear why you think this is true. What do you know about it?
I posted a link to a news article. Come on.
Well, not as making your point, but as evidence to support your point after you've made it. Mm-hmm. That's the difference. Is that I'll say, here's all the things that I think. And they'll say, well, I want to see. Well, okay, here's why I think this way. Here's some information. But I don't give them the information and say, here, read this, and then you'll understand what I'm saying. You know what I mean?
No, that's a good point.
Okay, so I have another Civil War question now for you guys. Yeah. Keep this on, try to tie this in now. So,
actually, that would have ended up on track. So, but go ahead.
Oh, did I cut you off? Finish.
Kind of. And the point being is that this is one of the things that power also recognizes is that people will make emotionally hyperbolic arguments rather than understanding what it is that they're even arguing for. So power knows this. They also can tell which ones of us are capable of arguing our positions because we have enough information and which ones don't. Trump is bad is not an argument. It's a characterization. It's an opinion. You know what I mean? And so when AI scrapes social media, they're also scraping for the content that patterns of keywords to see which type of thinker that they're dealing with. So that was my overarching point. That's where I was going with that.
And
So now
Dave,
that I've made it, please go ahead.
So if we have big tech now, which have identified as mostly liberal, and did give all this money to the Democrats are coming into power, and there's going to be this resistance on the other side, can we expect to see that resistance have their phones turned off? I mean, in great amounts, have their computers turned off. I mean,
Potentially.
wouldn't that be the warfare that you're going to see?
Well, this is something that's being argued for, like China's social credit system. Are you familiar with this?
Yes, yeah. I think you should have it for driving in the fast lane. I think that's fine. We need to take pictures.
How about for driving at all?
And if you're driving like an asshole, you need to be punished. I'm sorry, but.
Well, I brought this up the other night. You shouldn't carry an ID card. You should carry an IQ card. This will tell us everything we need to know about whether or not you should be allowed to drive or have a sandwich, or in any case.
Just
so
whoever puts the cards back, and that's all we need to know about you. Do you put your card back in the little thing, or do you just leave it right next to you?
That's actually a question on the Philosopher Memes website all the time.
Is it? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I would not be surprised for a minute that if you don't, and this is kind of, we're seeing the beginnings of this right now. Where did you see today that Congress, I mentioned this earlier, is calling for, there's one woman in Congress who is saying that all 130 Republican members of the House should actually be forced out, impeached, or forced to resign over their support of an idea to simply inquire into the nature of the veracity of the election. And like I said, what they were really saying was, we have people that hired us to be here. This is what they're saying. We need to respond to what they're saying.
Yeah.
This was not them going, yes, insurrection. It's just preposterous. It's not what they were doing. And when you read the statements that most of them, now there was a couple of outliers, David pointed out the other night. One of them was a newly elected congresswoman that was actually, her whole campaign was driven and funded in part by QAnon. So she was actually out there last week in the Capitol. It takes all kinds, doesn't it? In any case, getting to the point here in that that is one thing that's happening. We also have seen Parler. You violated terms of services by tolerating, calls for violence, et cetera, et cetera. And because you are leasing our servers, we're shutting your entire business down. What they haven't been clear on is where, the CEO of Parler is saying, no, they said we violated their terms of service and we didn't. I found out today doing some research that the difference was that Parler does not use AI to scrape their conversations to determine whether or not somebody is calling for violence or insurrection or whatever. Mm-hmm. Instead, they rely on user-reported events, which actually can be argued because, as I pointed out to David last night, I have leased servers from Amazon. I'm familiar with their terms of service. It can be argued that Parler actually followed their terms of service by dealing with it, because it doesn't say in their terms of service how to deal with it. It doesn't say that anywhere. So this is like the beginnings of it, especially when you have a whole group of people going, silence this guy. Do we really need? Here's actually the question. If you silence this group of people who are clearly pissed off enough to do whatever it is they did last week, do you think they're going to go away?
Oh no.
Just suddenly they're not dangerous anymore because because they can't talk on social media. That makes them less dangerous. That is ridiculous.
No,
in fact, I'd say it makes them more dangerous.
Yeah, you'll encourage them to become more organized and to
be Antifa. So
yeah, and it's going to be a very small. Yes, you're right. The Antifa, they've got it all figured out.
Yeah. What most most conservatives that I talk to, they're, as far as like when we're talking about if it's going to basically radicalize them, a lot,
God, those are so, God, man, people that say that kind of stuff, just I want to slap them.
Yeah, so most of them, I would gather probably won't harm a fly, but their anger level is definitely projected, and one of the things they feel is that the silencing thing is that their position on it, at least the ones I've talked to, isn't that they're inciting violence or they're saying kooky, crazy things like what's his name, or that lawyer,
Linwood. Oh my God. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Oh, Epstein's
so-
actually still alive.
Yeah, no, that's
Oh boy.
I knew it.
I saw him. He was in a car right next to me. I swear, at the stoplight by the
It was him
Safeway.
and Elvis.
Him and Elvis,
conservatives-
they were in.
So let me make my point.
Yeah,
The
yeah, I'm sorry,
conservatives I'm talking to, because I run a group that's has a fair majority of conservatives, libertarians, and centrists, but the conservatives are all saying the same thing. They're not trying to shut us down because they think we're going to incite violence or do some crazy shit. They're
wanna
shutting us down
silence our
because
ideas.
they don't want to hear the truth. They don't want to hear our side because our grievance might prove them as the bad guy. That's their position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in this case, again, the fact that that is subjective doesn't matter.
Mm-mm.
You know, because they're not going to get that conversation with someone.
No.
This is where, again, we're circling back around to where all this started, and especially with your questions, Martin, about what is power doing and how did this start and where did it collapse? Your initial foundation for this conversation was beautiful because you talked about the loss of what I have referred to many times as social cohesion. Social cohesion is and so I had this argument with David a couple of weeks ago, and he's using data that says, Denmark is the country of the happiest people on earth, which, okay, terrific. They are, I don't, I know some Danes. I don't think that that's not true, but I think what the point he was trying to make was it's because they get free shit, that they have this wonderful, and I went, well, I can tell you this, what I do know about them is that they're almost 100% homogenous. Mm-hmm. And the way David took it is, well, so that mean what I'm saying in some weird way is that minorities or people that are different from the native population make things worse. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you have the same group of people who can trace their lineage back 1,000 years to Vikings, which enslaved, dominated, burned towns, raped people, destroyed entire countries, and they're still proud of it. And nobody is telling them that they shouldn't be, that they should be embarrassed for where they came from. So they have a social cohesion that also, if you look at the same happiness, Japanese are another one, but they are not happy. They have a really high suicide rate.
Mm-hmm. They have a suicide forest.
Yes, they do. So, but that's also very cultural.
Martin's face. What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at the same time, in the same surveys where they say, okay, how happy are you, blah, 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 there is a trust that they have for each other and for their government that is also very high. We don't trust each other. We don't trust our government. And we're also being told that it's our fault that it's like this. We should be ashamed of ourselves for being men, for being white, for being brown, for living in communities that look like this one or that look like that one. There's a huge range of reasons that we are told that we should not feel good about who we are. So what does that do? And then that is passed down to children. Children are now being told in school that they shouldn't feel good about who they are. You tell my kid that, I will beat you within an inch of your life.
I'm coming after you if you're.
Yeah. You don't tell my child that kind of stuff. I will pull him from whatever school is teaching him this shit. Now, fortunately, my kids are all grown up at this point.
Well,
they missed it, thank God. but the point being is that the erosion of anything, any semblance of look, I'm. You guys have seen I'm fearless. I really don't. I don't pull any punches, but I'm also respectful. There is a difference between being afraid to have a conversation with somebody because of fragility, or going, look, I'm genuinely curious, and I would very much like to have this conversation, and I will respect you during that conversation, rather than go, oh no, you're just fragile. That's why you don't. No, I'm not. I'm fucking far from it. So stop telling me that shit, because what you're doing is calling me names. That's the way it's taken, you see? So let's call a bunch of people names. Let's destroy the social cohesion. And then once it's actually turned to ashes, one of the theories, Martin, is that then we can rebuild it in order to shift the balance to some sort of system of fairness. So a lot of people are arguing, and this is where Dustin was talking about earlier about how the critical theories have found its way into the fabric of our culture, right? Yep. I'm talking about the destruction of our cultural cohesion or our social cohesion, right? So now once it's there, Power can then go, okay, we're going to stop. You can't do this anymore. You can't own this anymore. You can't say these things anymore because it isn't fair to people that it upsets, and it upsets them because of you. And people that look like you, people that acted like you, people that came before you. So that's one of the hypotheses, that's what power wants from this.
That's the end game that I was asking about. I think we just mined this thing to a little piece of diamond there. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me.
So that again, I'm saying what the hypothesis is. I don't necessarily agree or disagree
that's just
with
one
it.
possibility. Yeah,
that is one thing that has been said. I've also heard that the only way to get enough people on board with something like, for example, I think climate change is a really good example. And I'm going to say this up front. I am not a physicist. Therefore, any opinion I have on whether it's real or it's fake is bullshit anyway, because there isn't any way for me to understand it. That being said, people who take staunch positions on it that do not have that kind of background, education, and support are simply regurgitating things someone else said. Mm-hmm. So, and I am not, so I want to make sure that that's clear. I'm actually, if a physicist comes and says, this is what's going on, I'm inclined to actually believe it. Mm-hmm. I don't know anything about it, so for me to argue it makes me, if I argued about it makes me a fool. So what makes me a skeptic is that I have seen unaffiliated physicists that disagree with it. That makes me, okay, this guy is just as qualified as this guy. So for me to gravitate to one or the other is a personal preference and not rooted in any sort of epistemological process.
Well, take, for example, Richard Liston. Richard Liston is an atmospheric physicist. You know who Richard Liston is?
I do, yeah. I've seen some of videos and interviews with him, and I'm trying to think of the other guy. He's a Japanese gentleman, physicist, Wu, I think, James Wu or something like that. In any case, where I was going with this was that it has also been hypothesized by some people that, as far as I'm concerned, they don't really know. But that is that the only way to solve the problem of climate change is to, again, usurp the power of the people so that the people can't say, no, this is my private property. The government is not coming here and retrofitting my house against my will. You follow what I'm saying? Or you're not coming and ruining my business because my business is burning coal. That's what I'm saying is that some people say that this is the reason for power to create these dynamics that allows them to take more of our power so that they can meet whatever ends they feel are necessary.
There was someone from the IPCC, a Norwegian lady, that literally said what you just said in the affirmative.
Speaking of the king of hyperbole, Clint is here, and if you look at his at the kind of arguments that he makes, they're purely. I mean, seriously, this is like the fallacy of presumption and the fallacy of what is it I'm looking for? Not shaming, but essentially, reducing you to somebody who's stupid for thinking what you think.
I'll tell Clint something that I tell people in another place that I spent time at. Keep coming back. Keep coming back.
So what we're trying to do here, Clint, is have reasoned conversations. I haven't said, "Oh, you're a moron for thinking there is climate change," because that's a stupid way to try and engage somebody. You know what I mean? Instead, I'm saying, look, here's a couple of facts for you. I am not a physicist, so for me to say it is happening or it isn't happening means I'm a fool. I can say that I tend to believe the people who do know. That makes more sense to me.
I believe the science.
Well, the science can be argued in a couple different ways too.
So I have a question for Dustin, if I can. Can I hijack it?
Go for it.
Is it about my CDs?
Oh no, I love staring at that when I like trying to read them. I'm like, what does he got? I'm more interested in. Never mind.
Okay.
So tying this back into this potential civil war that we're coming in and bringing it into what's happening like right now. Mm-hmm. Regardless of what's politically right or politically wrong, are you hearing that what happens the next few days on how the Democrats take power, like whether it's right that they should let this whole thing go, or if they overplay their hand, is this going to lead us to some real trouble coming up soon.
Let me put it into a respect, and I won't name this person, but he had an analogy that was just brilliant. And I'll just repeat what he said because he's absolutely correct. And it's going to answer your question for the most part. With everything that the Democrats are saying, Pelosi, even Biden this morning, the whole gamut, what their 100-day plans are. You basically got a basketball game that's got 10 seconds on the clock and the winning team's 14 points ahead. And at this point, they could just dribble the ball and run the clock out and then high five and good game and they're out of here. They're not going to do that. They're doing slight fouls, calling fouls, throwing layups. They're going to kick ass to the end, and they're going to make sure that everyone knows that they're dominating it. And this is basically where it's going. And that's not going to
honestly. You and I talked about that earlier, Martin, before Dustin came out. I was going, why wouldn't they grab power? The Republicans certainly would.
Yeah,
they would play this up to their advantage and use all kinds of hyperbolic nonsense to get them there. They would do the same stuff. The idea that there is something noble and good about this side in the way they steal from us, lie to us, rip us off, and subvert the rule of law, and the way this group steals from us, lies to us, and subverts the rule of law. It's like now we're arguing degrees. Well, yeah, they're both complete pieces of shit, but this piece of shit didn't pee in my cornflakes this morning, and this one did. So I'm gonna. It's insane. Their methods for fucking us over are different. That's really all.
Yeah.
I think their methods aren't even different, is it? It's the way that they get us engaged is different.
Well, that's what I mean. Their methods of their hyperbole is different. Their scare tactics. What it all comes down to, though, is what do humans respond to? Well, generally fear, because anger is most often a symptom or an offshoot or a way of dealing with fear.
It's byproduct of fear.
It is thank you. That's the word I was looking for. And so we are motivated by basically fear and anger. We're motivated by fear and greed. These are very simple things. Have you ever read The Art of War? Sun Tzu? Sun Tzu wrote this, I want to say 5,000 years ago, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And it is essentially... It is the divide and conquer idea that we're all familiar with, simply based on that cultural maxim, divide and conquer. We're all familiar with it. Sun Tzu was a Japanese general who wrote of this. But what he wrote of, it was more of a philosophy in that this is how it is that we can defeat our enemy, but this is a tool. It is a weapon that should be used to achieve our goals, but then treat the conquered with dignity and respect. And that is the part that's missing from the divide and conquer here. We can play on the enemy's weakness. What's the enemy's weakness? Fear and greed. And so how do we do that? Well, we either scare them or anger them or both in the same process. We get them to believe that the Republicans are the enemy, that they represent evil. Every basic human psychology, evolutionary psychology of humanity is all tied to the same stuff. So we have more sophisticated ways of dividing people these days. Actually, to Clint's point, he's saying the world is only, the world's only 3,000 years old. Are you assuming we're Christians too? That is so odd.
I thought that was 6,000.
I thought it was 6,000 years old too, by the nut jobs that believe that stuff.
I often teach people about their religion when they argue with me about it.
I found that atheists generally tend to understand religion better than the religious do. So in any case, the point being is that these tactics are still being used. They have been developed, through, they're a bit more sophisticated, but there's a couple things missing from them. And that is that treating the conquered with some decency and some dignity.
That's not going to happen. So let me ask you guys one more question now. So in modern times, we established that possibly the reason why we have the Trump supporter is because they feel like they've lost, actually everybody's kind of lost the mythos of what we're about. So they found hope in Trump. So now what's going to happen to that group of people now that Trump's going to be basically a person without a country? He's going to be persona non grata. I think he's going to be alienated and he's going to disappear in some ways. What's going to happen to that group of people now that they've lost that? They're going to be even more desperate?
I don't know.
You know what's funny is that I'm going to have to agree with David. I think Trump is a demagogue. Are you guys familiar with the proper definition?
Yeah.
A leader who makes use of popular prejudices and false claims and promises in order to gain power, which it's funny because that kind of describes them all. But he took it to an extreme that I'm not sure.
I know.
He's an opportunist. He didn't create a revolution. The revolution created him.
Well, you know, the level of sophistication by which he did it is, you know, it's really low bar shit. And that is, to me, I look at him and go, yeah, I mean, here's a whole list of this guy's lies. Here's a whole list of this guy's misdeeds. You know, so do you have principles or don't you? You know, if you're going to support, okay, here's what I think is going to happen. All right, you're asking which group are they going to continue to support them? What's going to happen?
What's going to happen to their emotionally? What's going to happen to them now that they had lost hope, they got hope, and now they're lost hope again? Are they even going to be in a worse, more desperate place?
It's hard for me to answer because
I see them as a wounded animal. I see them.
Well, which group? I see. To me, this is it's one of those things again where it lacks specificity.
That's fair.
You know, and everything
Well, Dustin keeps saying the 72 million. I keep hearing that on TV too. The 72 million. So, and I don't think it is 72 million. I think there are a lot of different factions within that, but I keep hearing that. So what happens?
That's what they think that voted for Trump.
Right.
Yeah. So they're just kind of equating it to that.
Right.
So Clint's interjecting here that this is actually really cool. Have you guys read the trilogy by Rick Perlstein, Goldwater, Nixon, and Reagan? The Goldwater book won a Pulitzer. I'll note that at the time that Perlstein gets to Reagan, he is so drippingly venomous that it's hard to read, but it's still interesting. I can only imagine what he would make of Trump. Definitely a new low for republicanism. I'm going to have to agree with the new low thing. And thanks for the recommendation. I'm actually going to buy it or buy them. That sounds like something that, again, you know, is my proclivity for history as being instructive rather than something that is just simply a way of gathering wisdom. This is the kind of stuff that I love because then we can use this kind of this backdrop for a better type of analysis of what it is that we're currently seeing. Thanks, Clint. That's really cool. I am going to buy these. I'm making a note right now. So what's hard to say is how are the people that believed in Trump and whatever it was that they think that he's represented to them, however they perceived him. You know, for me, rewinding now, and I'm going to say this again too, and I think you guys know that I didn't vote for him either time. You know, I wouldn't vote for a guy like that no matter what. My principles specifically won't allow it anyway. Because if you say that you don't like him because he lied and he cheated and he stole, well then why would I vote for somebody else that lies and cheated that they stole? Because they did it to a different degree? To me, that doesn't work. I can't do that. So the idea of Trump is what I think they're fighting for, the idea of him, rather than what he really is.
That idea will
you
live
think
on.
that's fair?
It'll find something. It'll find another. Yeah.
And so what'll end up happening is that a mythology will be created about Trump.
Yeah.
And that mythology will be kind of the basis for what people are fighting for if they're fighting. So I honestly, one of the things that I've noticed and has largely been swept under the rug is that for whatever reason, many people believe that once Biden was in power or that Trump was out of power or that there was a shift of power to Democrats that the kind of rioting and looting and burning and stuff that we saw last year by whatever group you want to call them. I don't, it can be utilitarian to say Antifa, but then you get into arguments about what they really are. And that's not my point, is that somehow that would go away. It didn't. There has been more violence since the election. In fact, I think I posted a week or two ago that the Portland mayor actually finally recognized Antifa as a group that was causing him problems and said, why didn't they stop? We expected this to stop once the power
because
shifted.
they don't like Democrats either. That's the fucking
That's what I'm talking about.
They hate Democrats. They're burning the system to the ground. They hate the whole thing.
And that is that is when we circle back around to the foundation of this discussion. It's about, where's the Civil War coming from? First of all, we have genuinely disenfranchised, we have generally oppressed people in different in different forms on different sides of the political spectrum that are going, this whole thing's fucked. We're going to burn it down. So then from there, it removes itself from some sort of a politically ideological conversation about left and right or Republicans and Democrats. It actually becomes a human fight, because my discussions with David have been very instructive in this. This is really about someone's humanity. It really isn't necessarily about, whether an election was stolen or rigged or blah, 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 blah. It's about people, whether you agree with them or not, they feel their experience has been one of being oppressed. And for a group of people to sit around and say that's bullshit it's like, how do you know that's bullshit? You're telling this person that they are wrong about what they experienced. So when we can stop that, that's when this will change. That's, like I said, blood will be spilled. A stalemate is always reached. One side or the other will declare victory either way. And then they will start going, okay, look, why do you feel like you were oppressed? What can we do to fix that?
Why couldn't we just do that now, right?
Yeah, why can't we skip the violence part? And this is something David brought up the other night, is these changes have always been made as the result of, in the wake of violence. And I've been thinking a great deal about this. And I'm still trying to find a way that I have a hypothesis that I still haven't been able to test. And that, or even be able to get my mind around whether or not, am I fishing in the dark out of idealism? Because ideally, I'd like to say something in the last 50 or 60 years has changed. And I'm still working on it, so I'm not going to share it with you just yet. But the point being is that that's where this is headed. And I think we've done a pretty good job of discussing why.
I think historically you could prove David's point about violence or that
Absolutely.
stuff. It's pretty fair. Yeah, I mean, we didn't get 8-day work. We didn't get an 8-hour workday because we asked for it.
No, it's true. Well, then there's more to it than that. David has recommended a couple of books to me that I've read. One of which was a very, very an excellent history of, again, I think of racism as a weapon in order to maintain hegemony and to create a system based on what he would call white supremacy. Anyway, like I said, one of the discussions I plan on having with him is being able to say, okay, here's where all the other cultures of the world that fed into that play in, because it wasn't part of the book that he recommended. So that being the case, because, and I said to him that, while I agree with the author's research and he did a great job, he wrote it from the perspective of his necessity, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying he actually kept to his own point that way. It made sense for him to do it that way. I probably would have written it the same way. So in any case, what we're looking at is the loss of social cohesion and the people feeling over the course of the last 3, 4, 5 decades, that they have lost their power, that they have lost their voice, that they are disconnected, disenfranchised, that, we can tell a lot by how well a country is doing by their suicide rate. That's another one of those measurements. Drug abuse, addiction, domestic violence. These are good ways to measure how well a country is doing.
Civilization's in decay. Yeah.
Essentially, yeah. And so once that happens, then we have people that want to rise to explain it. If it can't be explained through an epistemologically sound methodology, then they will conflate things, put them together, and say, "Here's your explanation." And people that feel powerless are now empowered, whether or not the message that they're using to find their power is accurate or not. Did I do a good job of encapsulating that for you?
I mean, it kind of comes down to when I don't, don't have trust in our government. And how could we have two sides of the government constantly saying government's bad, like they're in government, but they say it's horrible. Then I don't really see much of a way out of this. I don't see where it's going to get better. You
sound like literally that's what James Lindsay's been saying for almost a year and a half now. Is exactly what you're saying. And Brett Weinstein both.
I'll set you hip to him, Martin. I think you'll really appreciate what these guys talk about.
You would really enjoy them. Trust me. If you liked the who was it that the Righteous Mind?
Jonathan Haidt.
If you like Jonathan Haidt, then basically you're going to get more of a tongue-in-cheek out of those two. But they're
very sophisticated.
Yes, very
sophisticated, but something that's actually easily consumable.
Yes,
it's something that Haidt really goes into extreme detail in terms of the whole foundation of his moral foundations theory, where it came from, his studies, how he arrived at that, what the other people said, et cetera, right? So these guys find a great way to make it enjoyable to listen to them talk about it, to make it accessible. So I want to actually address this. Clint said something else here that I think is really relevant. It's hard to look at our knowledge of county by county voting or precinct by precinct numbers and history and the ability to granularize the results as they come in and think that wholesale fraud is even possible. I have said this many times. In 2016, a dear friend of mine and I were discussing the possibility of a fraud in our system that is large enough to actually make a huge difference. And at the time, Clint, I'm going to give you a little background here so that you know too. I'm not going to go into it like I did last night, but I am I'm a network security engineer. I'm a network security specialist. This is what I do, and I have been so for 20 years plus. And I remember, I asked David if he remembered maybe Clint, you remember this. I don't know, but you might remember the Diebold voting machine scandals of the 90s they actually created a documentary about how easily hacked the Diebold machines were.
PBS.
And it was, you remember that? So yeah, okay. And then in 2004, Diebold was actually, the people in charge were brought up on criminal charges because of fraudulent votes created by their machines, and they knew it. And that's why it was, if I remember correctly, this is why they were criminal charges in Ohio in election in 2004. And so Diebold was essentially, the way they answered this whole thing was, the way after the hearings and after the efforts to research it went into it, voting machines shouldn't be connected to online services. That was their solution. They should be what we call in the business air-gapped. An air-gapped network is, a group of machines that, has no cables between it and the wall, if you will, So that being said, I was actually in 2015, 2016, not even aware, I hadn't looked at it in a long time, that these voting machines that are still, by the way, the software that has been debated in terms of, the ability to have it automatically recount votes or whatever, is running on these same Diebold machines. They're newer versions of the Diebold machines, but I actually watched a video, I think David said he did too, of a guy who was able to turn one of those machines into a Pac-Man machine by hacking it. And so I looked at the code that he used and stuff, and it was like, oh yeah, this is simple. David argued that if I were to hack those machines, because here was my premise. My premise was that last year there was a massive security, vaguely, I was busy fronting a punk band. Right on. My own version of Vikings season 1. Sweet. So vaguely, so it actually did enter your mind at some point or another back then. You heard about it or whatever. Because Diebold also makes ATMs. They make security systems for banks. Diebold is, a very big company, and they make the voting machines that this Dominion software runs on. My premise, what I was positing was that last year, Dustin, I'm sure you are aware, Martin, I think you and I briefly discussed it, that our government's most secure systems were actually attacked and successfully hacked 6 or 8 months ago.
Yeah.
And during that time, we had, what was his name? The guy who was in charge of network security at the White House, the guy that Trump fired. And of course, the media spun it into he fired him because he didn't agree that there was a breach.
He wasn't loyal, whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And we don't have any way of knowing if that was the case or not. You can spin it either way. The point being is that this guy was saying this is the most secure election in American history when the White House was breached. White House network security was breached. The Department of Homeland Security network security was breached. Microsoft's Azure systems were breached. This was a huge. In fact, I said that it was very clearly. It was like a shot across the bow. That was in my business. I would have taken this as a declaration of war. So it has been traced back to Russian sources. Frankly, I know the president tried to say it was Chinese because I think it was convenient for him to do so. When I looked at the methods, this is definitely what we call a nation-state threat actor. but I didn't see the hallmarks of what a Chinese nation state attack looks like. So the point being, ladies and gentlemen, is that if that was possible and it took place this far back, how come it is that it's impossible, that it isn't really a thing, that it's all bogus to say that these machines were not compromised by a nation state threat actor? That had I'm not talking about compromised by Democrats. Personally, I think that's stupid. I don't think there's enough Democrats with, there just aren't enough people that hate Trump that could have access, that could flip this election. I just don't see it. To me, that's illogical. It doesn't make a great deal of sense. But what does make sense to me is that who would Russia rather see in power? I don't know, because I don't know what their politics look like. But let's just say, for the sake of my own hypothesis here, is that it is actually Biden. If they were able to get into all of these systems, and this guy who is in charge, who has a great pedigree, incredible reputation, worked for Microsoft for many years, he didn't know it. Nobody knew it. So for him to say that this was the most secure election in American history is, to me, that's at the very least extremely unprofessional.
It kills his credibility.
It does. And I pointed out last night that anybody who worked for me went to one of my clients and said, "Your network's the safest in history," I'd be pissed. I'd probably fire him, because, as I pointed out last night as well, in my business, we are constantly behind the threat actors. We're never in front of them, ever. Yeah. The FBI has made this very clear, is that we only respond once they figure out better ways to get into our systems. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm saying, is that shouldn't that be something that is worth congressional inquiry? Well, apparently not. And that's what bothers me. This is my argument. It isn't that I believe that it happened, or that that the Democrats stole the election. I don't know that is true or it isn't, and therefore my position is, I have no position. I don't.
Well, you're never going to know. We're never going to know that. It's never going to.
We had two examples of pretty much the same argument from both sides just recently. We had the Democrats, who they were going after him with Russian interference. The argument was that it didn't interfere with the election. And they were saying, but shouldn't we still know? Don't you still want to know? And the argument on the other side is, anytime you brought it up, they'd say, well, it didn't do the, and now it's reversed.
I brought that up too. I was going.
It's the exact same argument, and both sides just flipped. Yeah, they just flipped.
Yeah. And therefore nothing gets done. And then we have a further divided electorate, because they're pointing at each other going, "You're an idiot. You're a moron. You're you're an insurrectionist."
Yeah. And now it's leading to a civil war. See, these fuckers have done this to a point where they tried so hard to beat each other that now it's in a point where it could end up in a civil war. They fired up. Yeah.
This is where I'm challenging power. This is what I keep saying, is that David wants to interject that the Republicans who did.
Dave says he
froze.
Oh, he did. Well, we have you guys noticed that?
David, it's definitely you. We wouldn't.
Yeah, I think it's you in this case.
We wouldn't freeze.
So in any case, what I'm saying is that power did this too, because neither one of them wanted to get together, reach across the aisle, shake hands, and say, "You know what, you're right, we better look into this." Instead, they found ways to spin it to their advantage and then play to the disadvantage of their opponent. And who ends up paying that price? We do. Yeah. This is why, what it drives me nuts when people go, "Well, you're saying both sides are the same." No, I'm not. I'm saying they do the same shit.
Welcome back, David.
Hey, David. That's what I'm saying, is they pull the same crap. And they don't do it for our benefit.
So what do we do? We can talk about this for every day. Is it a third party?
The question right now for me is, are we doing it? It sure looks that way. We've got some people that I think we would generally disagree with in many ways in our chat. And I actually really like what Clint offered. This is great. I'm going to get these books.
He's clearly smart. I mean, that's for darn sure.
I know, but like I said, I think what Clint might be used to is, what I'm talking about is people just going, "Oh yeah." That's not what we're doing here. And I think I'm hoping that we're getting that across. Like you said, keep coming back. That's not
keep coming back.
The Skeptic Tank is not a partisan. We're not about partisanship here. None of us. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a conservative. What was great, did you see the other night when I asked David, "Okay, David, now that you've hung out with us a bit and you've been here, do you think we're conservatives?" And he went, and I went, "Okay, cool. The fact that you had to think about it is enough." The fact that he had to pause and consider what it is that we're about told me that we're consistent in what it is that we're what we talk about.
Everyone's going to have principles and leanings in some political way. It's human nature. You're going to have some sort of spectrum. And I think one of the problems we have socially today is we want to split it into two binary pieces, and whatever binary party you're not in, that's another. And I mean, we've been saying this all night. That's basically what that is.
Well, we've been saying it in very productive different ways, though, because everything has complexity and nuance.
We're humans. We're going to be complex and nuanced, and that's why it's frustrating for me when I see arguments online, or I get involved in arguments online. That binary process comes out. How frustrated it is, because you can't simplify things you can't simplify things that have nuance and context. That's important. Well, and you can't have that conversation.
What I'd like, actually, Martin, why don't you, I think this is a great time for us to again, revisit moral foundations theory. Because one of the things, after you read the book, you were actually saying now you can't not see when the different moral proclivities of people are being used to sell them something or to make them accept an idea. So just give us a rundown on what that looks like to you now. You've been able to give us some cool examples of, like you said, Trump hits absolutely every one of those things.
Trump hits all five of them, yeah.
Yeah, that upsets everybody, which is really interesting. So please share, and then I want to address something that Clint said here. This is really cool.
Well, basically, it's just a statement that there's five moralities that are innate in us, meaning that we have chapters that are open. We're not a blank page when we're born. Right, and he spends a lot of time tying these all back into how they evolved when they're hunter-gatherers.
We're talking about Jonathan Haidt's moral foundation, right? Okay, all right.
And if you want to know what they are, all you got to do is watch all the ads where they beg you for money. So,
because it hits them all
in the eyes, but with the dying, the dog shivering, that's going to trigger that. If that triggers you, then you know that they've talked to your elephant. So the way he describes it, your elephant is the emotional center that you have.
Then you have your rider.
Leads the way, and then you have a rider that people. And when you think of that, you'd say, "Oh, the rider's in charge." No, it's the elephant's in charge. Mm-hmm. The rider just goes about explaining where the elephant went.
So the elephant is your emotional response, and your rider is your intellectual response.
Yep. Yeah, and they're actually in different parts of your brain. If you think of your limbic system as your emotional center, your limbic system is old. It's been around for a long time. It evolved prior to the frontal lobe, which is where the rider is. The rider's up there in the frontal lobe, explaining everything, doing language, logic, all that kind of stuff. And they work together in different ways. But if you want to win somebody over, like let's say I'm trying to convince somebody of something, and I realize all I need to do is kind of figure out what their elephant believes. I got to figure out where they are emotionally on the subject, and then try to figure out a way to not scare them and talk to them, and eventually get them to get their rider.
Give them a way to intellectualize it.
Right, and there's certain things that I know that I can say that'll immediately scare the elephant will run off, it'll be gone, and there's no hope in getting into them. And liberals tend to have two of those, and
three.
They just two really. They have the
Karen harm,
right? Karen harm, and then they have the equality. That things need to be equal and fair.
Equality and fairness. Okay,
right. Those are the two, and the do no harm is the biggest one. That's the one that they're most. And once you understand that, and you look at the liberal platform, and you look at the conversations you have, you can see that that's where they're coming from. And that's the thing, is that they're good solid things that are coming from them, and then they get manipulated by.
I'm going to jump in real quick. Hold on,
go ahead.
Martin.
Yeah, no, you got it.
Just described why the left attaches to a lot of this crazy critical theory, because it is altruistic sounding, and it applies to those moral foundations for them. It doesn't have to make sense to them. It's just that it
just has to speak to those things that are innately important.
Yes. Yeah, they'll create a narrative that makes it make sense because it makes their elephant feel good.
Exactly.
That's it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, on the converse, and I want to make sure again that we're making a correct distinction here, is that moral foundations theory also says that conservatives as well as centrists, tend to operate on all 5. Or in this case, they've added another one. There are 6 now since the book was
there's
written.
6 now. That's right.
On all of those moral foundations. And Hyde makes it very clear that that isn't something that is better. It doesn't make the people on the right more moral. In fact, it creates problems. One of the problems that I think it creates, and this is why I asked you to explain it, Martin, is because having all 5 of them leads to Trump. And having all 5 of them leads to you accepting somebody because you can say, okay, I'm willing to throw out these 2 moral foundations because he's got the other 3. When you only have 2, you operate on both. Right. That was something that Hyde talked about. He said, look, conservatives having all 5 doesn't mean they're more moral. It means that they have harder that there are conundrums that don't always lead to good decisions.
He describes it as they have a wider palette of flavors that they can taste.
Yes.
So that they are, and another way to describe it, which would make them upset, is they actually have a lot more trigger points.
Yeah.
Liberals only have 2 trigger points.
And they have trigger points too.
They are, yeah. Well, and they both share the fairness. That's the one thing that's fascinating. Yep. So that fairness
between them, they both share fairness and
but they interpret it completely differently.
That's right.
From the liberal side, it's that I want to take care of the persons of the low, and that's being screwed over by the rich. And from the conservative perspective, it's that you should get back what you put in. That if you put hard work, you should get back. If you don't, then you shouldn't get anything.
I think this is also material because, again, as I said earlier, power has this information.
Thank you.
So when they are seeking to do, like I said, I watched it today. I watched Chuck Schumer come out and say that we should put Ted Cruz on a no-fly list. You know what I'm saying? To me, it was a brilliant maneuver because what he's looking to do is capitalize on the weakness that the Republicans are currently experiencing. So here was another thing, and I'm going to leave this. We'll make this the last point I want to bring up, and I want to get your feedback, both of you, on this. And that is that we've also had a huge list of donors to the Republican Party and Republican causes have publicly announced that they are going to cease, at least temporarily, at least in their words, making these donations to the party, and to the party causes. I was thinking, wow, okay, so if Trump is no longer political clout, and he's not. He is now politically,
he's a man without a country.
He is a man, dude. He's going to have to go hide someplace.
Yeah.
So we've got midterms coming in a mere 2 years, and this was the Republicans' plan to try and shift the balance of power back in their direction, which generally works. If you have right now the balance of power is it
was a weird week.
It's been pretty. Yeah, absolutely. So now, how are they going to actually do this? If Trump is just political hot potato, we're not touching this. This group of people is not going to be donating. So what do you do? Well, what you do is you do what you come out and do what McConnell did and go, yes, Trump should be impeached. Did you hear that? He was actually supporting impeachment. He said his conduct definitely warrants impeachment, right? So to me, I was going, that's a pretty smart move, McConnell, because your ass is in the freaking hot seat right now. Yeah, you just got reelected, but your party's freaking doomed. And this is actually, the reason I bring it up is because I think it kind of speaks to something that Clint's saying. What do? Seems like Grandpa Joe is putting together a marginal majority while the GOP will splinter to Trumpism and center right. If we can hold the clown car together for a few years, and I absolutely love that term, and calm down, we might manage to get back to Nixonism. This is great. So what I'm saying here is...
The good old days.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Back when things were merely just about Watergate,
Bad guys you could hang out with and have a beer with, yeah.
Right, yeah. Maybe we could get lucky and get another good old George Bush, Mr. C average in college guy. So that being said, man, I'm predicting that this is going to be a struggle. The GOP is going to have one hell of a time making any more arguments about anything.
Can Trump actually create a third party that actually has, because we've never been able to do that. And I heard, so I was watching, I love Rush, and Rush was talking about how their band worked together with 3 people. Like it was always.
He's not talking about Limbaugh, folks. He's talking about a band. Yeah.
No, he was saying that we didn't have these big fights, or we never split it up. It's like, why'd they get along? He says, well, it was always three people. So two people, one, we've had different sides. One person would always be the tiebreaker. And they'd always go, oh, that makes more sense. And so that they were able to make decisions in a band that way. And that's why they loved having the three. And so if we had a three-party system, maybe we could say, we had that one group that would be like, all right, you're crazy, I'm going over here. And they could be like the tiebreaker. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And that sounds like almost like a parliamentary system, really. No, and I'm with you, David. Who's going to give Trump money? Anyway, so
yeah, who? Nobody.
Dustin, do you have any thoughts on the mechanics of trying to develop a third party? Because ultimately, I think what would have to happen, and this has always been kind of the argument, it is going to split the party, which splits the vote, which provides more power to power. Right? To the power, to the power.
The left is battling two versions of, and they can never win anything because they'll be split up.
Well, both parties are battling two versions of each other, which is what's kind of...
That's true.
It's kind of funny what? You have the far left progressives, and then you have the neoliberals, the establishment. And right now, the progressives are driving the Democrat Party. I mean, they are in charge. Nancy Pelosi is just kind of trying to keep her job and keep them happy because they knock her out of her position right out.
You're going to have to ask AOC. Yeah.
You say that, but then I don't know if you did this, but I did. I looked at the voting record, and there was only one of them who didn't vote for Pelosi to be in charge. As far as the squad, as far as the well-known progressive, it was Tlaib who did not.
I have to find. It's funny because I disagree with Tlaib on almost everything she says.
At least she has principles.
She absolutely has principle. Absolutely.
Well, it's just like the Tea Party. The Tea Party kind of folded in now. You don't hear about them anymore. I
think the Tea Party is now going to be the Trump Party, to be honest.
Well, the Tea Party was
Cruz. At Cruz, yeah.
Look at what power did to the Tea Party. Tea Party was really an answer to abuse of power.
Yeah.
And they were success. The press and the power in charge were successful, and I mean the Republicans were successful at making the Tea Party the party of racism. Mm-hmm. That they were bigots, that they weren't inclusive, just destroyed them. It only took a couple years, too. It wasn't too hard.
If you think about it, these are people technically in their own party.
The mystic crew of Atlantis. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say
you haven't seen the Democrats do that to the squad because the squad is just a Democrat twisted version of their own splintered off.
The squad has those. Here's the problem: is that the established liberal elites have their money. That is what they are. They're corporation and money. But they don't know how to. It's kind of like, okay, have you guys ever seen the movie Aliens 4? It's terrible.
It's truly awful. Yeah,
So, and I'm not using that analogy because it's a shit movie, so they're shit. My point is that what happens is that you get people in power, specifically at this point, where they feel like if they've got a monster they've created, a Frankenstein or an alien, genetic alien, and we're going to have control of this. We're going to use its power to keep our power and move forward to be more powerful. But what happens? The alien goes after and kills everybody. It becomes the power.
Honestly, this is actually, to me, what you just said is the answer to all of the questions that Martin started with. It's going to eat itself.
Yeah,
this whole thing will eat itself because power can't get out of its own way enough to go, wait a minute, maybe we should be listening to these groups of people. And the way we start doing that is by listening to our political opposites in power. Mm-hmm. They're not going to do that.
No,
not at least until it becomes such a crisis that it's far too late.
This little experiment's over. This round is over.
Yeah. No. That ship has sailed, man. It's halfway around the flat Earth right now.
It would not.
It's headed towards the ice wall.
How you guys will know when the Democrat Party, who's currently going to be in a monopolized power position at this point, you will know by the time we get around to that midterm section, if we're all alive by then, that when they start, if you start having defections to the Republicans, or you start having on votes, or you start having some pushback, and then all of a sudden you start seeing, it's going to be like explosion inside the house. You're going to start having threats of primaries. You're going to start having threats.
We're going to primary you. That'll do it. Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to primary you. They're going to start slandering them in politically online. It's going to get ugly. And just like how I feel about established Republicans, neoliberals are cowards.
Oh God, these are the most spineless turds that I'm just.
They're
like,
awful.
Wow. Do you guys have any principles or not? Are you going to stand up for what it is you tell us that you believe, so that you can get our votes? No. Gee, there's a shocker.
Well, Krishna, it's like that for the stimulus bill or the omnibus bill that you listed that. You look through that list and you're just like, okay, it's like you just posted, here's Cory Booker. We're gonna fight for $2,000, and then it's like, check mark.
Yeah, he went and voted for it.
Oh, that was within a day.
I love that I was able to find both bits and put them together. Hey, look at this. Here's Booker's voting record, and here's all the shit that he said. You know, so again, for me, and this is something that's so hard to get across in such a polarized world, is that I really don't give a shit about either. I truly don't. But I'm accused of it depending on which argument I'm making, which is really, that should scare everybody. If I'm saying, and I said this the other night, I am not opposed to socialized medicine. I just haven't heard an idea I think is going to work right yet. That's all. You know, give me a better idea. Pull the pork and the bullshit out. Let's actually see how we can make this work and fund it and make it so that it actually delivers good services for everybody. Haven't seen a great plan yet. That's all. And I say that, and all of a sudden I'm a socialist, and I'm a bootlicker, and I'm a Biden guy, and I love the Clintons, and humping the donkey, and I'm like, what the fuck is your problem? I'm just saying that an idea is what I want to hear. An idea. Then I'm accused of being a closeted Trump supporter if I jump in on a conversation where something he said has been mischaracterized, twisted, and I go, whoa, wait a minute, he didn't say that. Now I'm a Trump ass kisser. And it's like, no, I like ideas and facts and truth. You know, that's the pursuit of a skeptic.
I had not run into anybody like you. I didn't know that you people existed.
You people. He just othered me. You see that?
I didn't know that. I spent all my time, and I think most people do. And so I guess what I'm explaining is that mindset is that we have these ideological arguments where we just respond and repeat what we've heard. And then we're used to, it's like if you're in a play and you have your lines and I have my lines. And I say my lines and you say your lines. And I'm used to your lines and I say my lines, and we just kind of do that. But then when you go up to somebody and they say something different, you're like, now I don't know what to do. I don't know.
Well, and what you do is you automatically assume that they're lying to you.
No, I keep doing my lines. I keep saying my lines, waiting for you to say what you're supposed to say.
This is a great analogy.
And that's what you do, and that makes you go, oh, well, wait a minute. And that's different. I can't argue or fight you because you don't have that same. You're not doing that.
So what did we just learn here, kids?
An NPC.
This is actually what we call the fallacy of presumption.
Yeah.
Where you jump into an argument using weapons designed based on your presumption of what somebody said or is thinking or what they're about. And I won't do that. One of the things that I love that you guys all know I'm a addict in recovery. I hate using that term because it makes it sound like, you'll be stuck somewhere for the rest of your life. I'll be 14 years sober this October. And I mean that. No, I haven't fallen off the wagon. There's been no screw ups. But one of the things that I learned in all of this is to truly dig deeply into my own processes of thinking and see if I'm telling myself the truth. You follow what I'm saying?
I didn't get that from good and sober. That didn't happen to me the first time.
That's something, and what's funny is that once you make a practice of that, you can't possibly bullshit yourself anymore. It's just not. You can't do it. So that being the case, is that what I'm always searching for is other. Thank you, David. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. I really do.
Well, I have 1 year in 10 days.
Congratulations, man. It's huge. Some people, and again, I don't want to derail this, and actually, we should probably wrap it up here pretty quick.
I've got some birthday cake waiting for me.
That's right. It's your birthday, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, happy birthday! Well, you know what?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're hanging out with us. That's awesome.
Yeah, what the hell are you doing here, man? That's cool. Great, happy birthday, Dustin.
We're taking
Right on.
down Christmas. My daughter's not here, so I was like, "Well, I'm going to go on the podcast."
While
They're
you're
talking
taking-
ab-
while
they're
you're
talking about
taking-
James Lindsay.
While you're taking that tree down,
Uh-huh.
do the deconstructionist idea. Do the critical
I'll go and
theory
tell her.
idea.
I'll say, "So why
Yeah.
do you think we do this?" And it's just be like, "Oh, because it's for
It's actually a German tradition, believe it or not. But
well, she's German, so yeah."
so that's what I'm saying. Maybe she'll appreciate the conversation. But the point being is deconstruct everything that you think and try and figure out why you think it. It's really challenging, and it takes serious intellectual honesty to get you there. And I'm not saying that I am always. I'm not. I'm human, so that's not possible. But I can tell you what I do always do is go, wait a minute, that was bullshit, and you know it. So figure it out, jackass. I just can't. I can't hide from it anymore. So that being the case, I'm always. Hey, Clint. Actually, you know what, man? I really appreciate your contributions tonight. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate that once you let the hyperbolic stuff go, that we were able to get some great stuff out of you. In fact, I'd really like to see. I know that you have come to the Skeptic Tank Facebook page, and I do recognize there's a couple of people that that work in hyperbole, like any other great artist would work in oils or clay. You know what I mean? So please have at it with those folks. But generally, what I was circling around to is that I've spent 15 years in program and in therapy dealing with my addictions. And one of the things that my therapist shared with me was something I thought was great. After doing his work for 50 years as a therapist, he says that he still enjoys his work because he stays open and curious. Stay open and curious. When you can do that, you can have conversations with people that you don't necessarily agree with, and be really honest about what it is that you think and feel. Anyway, again, thank you so much, everybody that has participated. David, I really appreciate it. Brian, it's good to see you. Eric, dude, thanks so much for being here. There's only a few of you, but I appreciate every one of you. As always, if we got something wrong, mischaracterized something, presented incorrect information, let us know. I would much rather realize that I've been wrong and correct it than stand on some bullshit and pretend that it's something real. I hate it when people do that. Be well, everybody. You guys hang around for a minute. Have a good... thanks, Brian. Seriously, man, I appreciate that you come here. I appreciate you all come here. Have a good one.